The question of why she betrayed him echoes in the young man's mind as he watches his beloved in the arms of another man. The man casually mentions that it took him some time to break into his house because the world had already ended. There was no longer a civilized society, and power ruled everything. The girl says that strength dictated the rules and that he should understand and not bring shame. So the man grabs his baton and prepares to strike, while the young man asks what he intends to do with him. 28 weeks after the world turned to ice, humanity lay buried beneath layers of snow. A man steps onto the frozen surface, leaving footprints. An elderly man, nearly frozen, watches him as the boy passes by with a backpack. He removes his mask and inhales the cold air, saying that it seemed no one had explored this area yet, as comforts like food and fuel had become scarce and precious. The young man looks down from a cliff, noticing that the ice layers were deeper and assuming it should be safe there. However, the ground suddenly begins to tremble. He turns, saying, "This is bad," wondering if it was an earthquake. The frozen world was God's way of saying that civilizations were as fragile as layers of ice. Then the young man plunges headfirst into an icy abyss, realizing that if he falls, he will lose his life. He grabs his equipment and tells himself not to give up now. Securing himself against the ice wall, he barely manages to stay on his feet. He thinks he isn't slowing down fast enough. Eventually, he crashes into an old store. Lying on the ground, he smiles. "I landed in snow," he says. "I would have died if it had been solid." After all, as the saying goes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Looking ahead, he appears anxious. The scariest thing in this frozen world is a three-eyed creature. Some call them the white-skinned monsters that see humans as prey. The young man is about to finish his sentence when he is startled by the sight of white armor. He immediately flees, thinking he is still far from being safe. A parasite crawls along the ice stalactites hanging from the ceiling. Just as the white armor is about to seize the young man, the ice stalactites are severed. They shoot toward the demonic creature, piercing its head before it can harm the boy. He wonders if it was just a collapse caused by the commotion, but quickly changes the subject. Either way, he was safe. Snow begins falling again above him. The boy shouts, "More are coming." However, the snow only falls beside him. He is buried under it in sighs and relief, thankful to be safe. Yet, he is now trapped as the parasite slithers toward him. It creeps closer to his arm, which is stuck in the snow, and then merges with him. Suddenly, the boy wakes up, but one of his eyes is now a different shade. Kneeling in the snow, he asks, "What just happened?" A blue vein has spread along his neck. Either way, he had been outside for quite a while now. He notices a chocolate bar and mutters, "I can't return empty-handed. I need to hurry." Amidst a massive frozen structure, he reflects. With most streets buried beneath layers of ice, he should return using the tunnels. But he isn't sure how much longer he can continue living this way. It wasn't any better than living inside the buildings where many people had been trapped when the disaster struck. And with resources running low, no one knows what could happen next. After all, not everyone could avoid crossing the line. He approaches a corridor and looks around cautiously, noticing that no one is patrolling there. "I should get home quickly," he thinks, knocking on the door of apartment 409. A girl with two buns in her hair opens the door. The young man asks, "Why did you open the door like that?" But the girl quickly embraces him, saying, "I really wanted to see you." She asks, "Did you miss me?" He nods, saying, "I did, but did you lock the door?" The girl dramatically asks, "Is locking a door more important than your girlfriend?" The boy pulls out a chocolate bar, saying, "I found this for you." Handing it over, she is surprised and asks, "What is it?" Sim realizing it's a chocolate bar, she hugs her boyfriend tightly, screaming, "I love you so much." Pulling back, the girl asks, "Is that all?" The young man explains, "I nearly got eaten by a monster to get it, so you should hurry up and eat." However, the boy's backpack is stained with blue blood. Growing suspicious of her partner, the girl breaks the chocolate bar. Sitting before a fire, he says, "I haven't found anything decent in the past few days." He wonders if he should eat all the seeds he managed to gather, though he had planted them all and none had grown. "If I eat them now, I might be sabotaging my future," he thinks. He sits on the chair anxiously, saying, "I'll go crazy at this rate." The boy picks up a piece of meat and says, if eating this was safe, then the people here wouldn't need to tolerate their enemies anymore. He throws the meat into the fire, turning it blue. He remarks that it was highly flammable and a good fuel source. Seeing a broken clock, he wonders if it was Valentine's Day. Scratching his head, he reflects on whether he had forgotten about it. But he walks toward his girlfriend, apologizing for forgetting, only to fail in finding her. Outside the door, the boy hears a strange sound. That was the signal he had planned with Ming, and he wonders what she was doing outside. So he quickly opens the door, only for a bat to come flying toward him, hitting his face with full force. The boy is sent flying in an instant. Then the intruder steps into his home and wishes him a Merry Christmas. "What do you think of the surprise?" he asks, holding Ming in his arms. The boy asks if Cheming really betrayed him with Lu Dong, but the girl yells, "You still want to know the reason when you deceived me first with one of your chocolate bars? You've been stockpiling food and had a large backpack for it." Lu Dong slams his bat against the ground. He apologizes to his little friend Mo. "I should at least give you a small warning," he says. Since the world was over and everything was ruled by strength, the weak couldn't even protect a woman. He had two choices: trust the strong or become food. Now, Mo had to hand over whatever food he had. The boy asked, "How could it be possible to hide anything from me?" But Lu Dong didn't believe him. He declared, "This is the end for you," and struck Mo's leg with the bat. Then he hit the boy's face, knocking out one of his teeth. He even broke his arm. It was a horror scene as they beat him until he lost his life. Completely injured, one of Dong's subordinates searched the entire house but found almost nothing. Dong said, "We need to be more thorough." He then demanded a knife. He cut into Mo while he still lay there lifeless. Mo, in his final moments, reflected that what he had feared most had happened. If he had another chance, he would make them pay. He wanted to live. And so, an entity granted his wish. Mo woke up in an office. His computer was still on. Its eyes suddenly snapped open. He screamed, "Lu Dong, what just happened?" He wondered. He had just lost his life, but now he had no injuries at all. There were only 28 hours left before the world froze over, with violent protests erupting in the streets. The police department had deployed a massive force to contain them. At the same time, the elites of Manhattan were drinking with their companions, and the gangs were making deals in the deepest parts of Brooklyn. No one in the city knew what was about to happen, except for him. He had gone back in time. People admired the northern lights in the sky, but the boy already knew they were a prelude. He looked at his phone, thinking the only person who would call him at this hour was his girlfriend, Ming. He remembered her calling him weak, and he realized he had never noticed her true nature, someone who betrayed him in such a way. He decided he would cut her out of his life. He answered the call. "Are you working hard right now?" she asked. "The aurora looks beautiful. Could you send me some money?" My credit card was frozen. Mo paused for a moment before replying, "We're breaking up. Stop calling me from now on." The girl was left in shock, but he simply deleted her contact from his phone. As he walked, he reflected on his second chance. The girl who had made him lose his life should freeze, along with everyone else. On the Brooklyn neighborhood bridge, the time was 11:58 p.m. The boy murmured for this opportunity. He needs to prepare properly. In his past life, within the next 24 hours, when the world froze, the temperature would drop to zero. He had 28 hours. In theory, it seemed like a lot of time, but what people would do would only bring chaos and collapse. So, realistically, he needed to gather as many resources as possible within an hour. Besides daily necessities, he needed equipment for self-defense amid this chaos. He planned to look for something like a pistol. Police officers saw the boy walking and said he looked suspicious wandering around at this hour, so they should work together to apprehend him. One of them stepped out of the car and called out to Mo, ordering him not to move. He pointed his gun at him. "Place your hands where I can see them," he commanded. His partner spoke into the radio, reporting that they had a suspect on 4th Avenue. Meanwhile, the officer asked what Mo had in his hand. The young man analyzed the officer's confusion. "I'm just holding my phone," he said. But the countdown hit zero, and he reflected that he didn't have time to waste on a pig like the officer. He prayed they would let him go after an inspection. The officer warned him that at an hour like this, he shouldn't approach without caution. Meanwhile, his partner asked, "What's in the backpack?" and told him, "Hand it over." Mo explained, "It's just things from my office job." Pulling a blue notebook from his bag in a panic, the officer screamed, "It's a weapon," and fired a shot at Mo. The bullet raced toward the boy without mercy. The young man thought, "This is it. My chance to live is about to end here." But then he denied that thought, telling himself he would survive. His eye began to glow with electric blue streaks. An aura surged around Mo as the bullet approached. The young man wondered what was happening. He could see the bullet's trajectory, questioning whether time had slowed down for him. So he tilted his head to the side, realizing he could dodge it. It wasn't an illusion. He cursed the officer, saying, "I'm a citizen, and you have no right to shoot me." Then he rushed toward the officer, muttering, "Can't waste time on fools." The bullet missed and struck the ground. Instantly, thin layers of ice formed over it. Mo moved so fast toward the officer that he left trails behind him. He landed a punch to his face, shattering his jaw and making him spit blood. The officer collapsed onto the ground next to his overweight partner. The second officer trembled as he looked behind him. Seeing his friend completely wrecked from the impact, he wanted to know what the hell had just happened and what had done that to him. The officer fell to the ground in terror, pointing his gun at Mo. He demanded, "What the hell are you?" But the young man calmly approached him, saying, "Even I don't know what I am." Then, a single scream echoed through the Brooklyn streets. After the incident, the overweight officer reported over the radio, An officer is down, and a suspect has fled with our firearm. He repeated his call, urging the station to respond. As a trail of blue energy formed ahead of him, he muttered, "My day is cursed." Leaving a glowing trace behind, Mo sprinted away. He headed toward his home, apartment 409, and collapsed onto the floor as the energy dissipated behind him. The young man took deep breaths, shaken, wondering if what had just happened was real. He wanted to know how he had managed to do all of that. Then he picked up the gun and determined to test whether he could do it again. He aimed the pistol at the mirror and fired a shot. His ice power activated, turning one of his eyes to blue. Mo suddenly moved forward. Catching the bullet in his hand, he grinned excitedly as he realized what he had just done, wondering if he had awakened some kind of superpower. Looking at his shoulder, which was covered in ice, he questioned why, since the global freeze hadn't even started yet. Could it be because he moved with the bullet? Like a supersonic jet, perhaps? He concluded that this ability affected his speed. It might not seem too sophisticated on paper, but with his knowledge of the apocalypse, he was already one step ahead of everyone. A knock came at the door, making him turn to see who was looking for him. It was an elderly woman named Mrs. Fang. She questioned Little Mo about what that gunshot was. The young man made up an excuse. "It was just my TV. I broke the remote. Apologies for the noise." But the woman sighed, reminding him, "Don't forget what happened at the nearby supermarket. The streets aren't safe. Be careful." Mo thanked her, apologizing for worrying her. She simply nodded and returned to her apartment, saying that young people shouldn't overwork themselves. Then she closed the door to Mo's apartment. The young man quickly shifted his focus back to the main problem, resources. Remembering the supermarket that the old lady mentioned, he realized it might have everything he needed for the apocalypse. So, with a wicked smile, he decided he would stockpile his food. At the supermarket, the cashier yawned quickly while a security camera recorded the shelves. It captured only Mo looking at the food, but in a blink of an eye, he vanished into a blur. The girl didn't even notice, continuing to yawn in exhaustion. But then, an enormous receipt appeared on her screen. She wondered what it was and if someone had made a purchase. Reading a note at the bottom, she saw a message telling her not to be scared and to go home to stay safe. That made the girl question the strange receipt. First they were robbed, and now they were receiving odd messages upon checkout. However, at the same time, two men entered the store. One of them had a pistol in his hand. The girl sighed, wondering what was going on these days. But then the man pointed the gun at her head and apologized. "This is a robbery," he said. "You need to hand over all the money in the register." He told her to hurry up while an icy aura crept toward the store. The gun began to freeze from the cold. Then the entire store followed. Coated in frost, a leg stepped inside as one of the robbers asked, "Why did it suddenly get so cold?" His partner ordered him to turn toward the door. He did and came face to face with a tall, slender figure in white armor. The thief demanded, "What the hell is that thing? What kind of monster is that?" His partner immediately fired at the creature, but the bullet simply curved around its bluish blood. The thief screamed, "We can't kill something like this." He fired again as the creature's hand reached for him. The monster grabbed the thief, commenting on his face, and slowly peeled off his skin with its fingers. Then it ripped off the man's face, saying, "You taste bad." The cashier held up her phone, determined to record the scene. A video captured the monster devouring the thief. Police officers watched the girls live stream on their phones, commenting, "This format's popular." But then an error message appeared on the screen, making them wonder if it was a government emergency alert. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the city, warning all citizens. Mo opened his door, hearing that this was a broadcast from the Department of Logistics and Security for the Homeless. He was surprised. It was starting already. The city was experiencing an unexplained cold wave, and everyone was instructed to shut their doors and windows. The cold wave was coming, and Brooklyn would be the first to suffer. An hour and 9 minutes had already passed since it began. Inside Building 58 of the new district, in an ordinary apartment, the alert urged citizens to pay attention. It repeated that this was a message from the Department of Logistics. Meanwhile, Officer Joe commented it must be serious if they're getting involved. A girl smoked a cigarette while watching the alarm on her phone. Mo used a screwdriver, thinking there wouldn't be any setbacks. Lu Dong flicked his lighter and asked, "Aren't you going to talk?" Beaten and bloodied, the man weakly said, "I truly don't know anything." Dong pulled out his phone. "You still don't recognize it," he demanded. "What's in this photo? You drugged the boss's daughter." The man sobbed, insisting, "I didn't know at the time." Dong crouched down, telling him, "You better start praying, because at least God might have mercy on you." Then he grabbed the man's hand and drove a knife through it. He muttered something about counting from 1 to 5 inside his box. Inside the box were 6 severed fingers. One of the henchmen asked along, "What should we do with this guy?" The young man replied, "The sin of lust deserves death by fire. Throw him into the boiler." The subordinates hurled his body inside and then sealed it shut. One of them muttered, "The boiler's old, it might explode." The other man told him to shut up. Lou was waiting for them. However, the henchman near the boiler suddenly noticed something was wrong. A massive explosion erupted from the apartment. His friend grabbed onto his arms while his partner cursed, covering himself from the growing shadow. The screwdriver slowed to a stop. Mo declared the plant cultivation structure is finally complete. With his current supplies, even if he didn't leave, he could survive for quite a while. But it still wasn't enough. Supplies would eventually run out, and sustainable self-sufficiency was the key. His plan was to build the perfect survival chamber, one that could sustain itself indefinitely. He picked up his phone, noting that the freezing phenomenon had been going on for almost an hour now. He needed to hurry because this was the time to speed things up. In this world, time was life. But then a knock came at his door, and the young man wondered what it could be. As he opened it, he questioned why the sensation felt so familiar. "Officer Joe," he said, apologized to Mr. Mo for disturbing him. Mo then asked, "What's the problem, old Joe? What's going on?" Joe explained, "The temperature has suddenly dropped and the heating system is broken. I'm warning everyone to stay safe." Mo remembered something happening last week. The malfunction hadn't been fixed in time. When he went to repair it, the system was already completely broken. He couldn't make the same mistake again. "I'll take a look at it," Mo said, asking the officers to let him help. He then closed the apartment door behind him. Climbing the stairs, the officers asked, "Where are you going?" Mo replied, "Isn't the boiler room supposed to be up here?" Joe explained, "The boiler's in the basement. We need to go downstairs." Mo reflected on how the boiler room was technically illegal in the apartment complex. Fang had mentioned it before, so it should be upstairs. He wondered if he was developing early amnesia. Inside the basement, Joe commented, "It's freezing down here." Then, Mo noticed something strange about the smoke. It felt like cold air. Joe led him toward the boiler. Mo tinkered with it, saying it should be fine now. But then he noticed a blue liquid on his hand and wondered what it was. Joe's partner asked if there was a problem. At that moment, two white figures appeared behind him. They exploded his head while screaming for fingers, saying they were growing back. Mo questioned how this could be a white armor. Joe panicked, asking, "What the hell is that thing?" Overcome with terror, he was paralyzed. The white armor prepared to attack. Mo activated his ability immediately, dashing in front of Joe and pushing him down to prevent the white armor from striking him. Then he sprinted away, muttering, "Old Joe almost lost his head." He noticed that the door was still open, so he bolted toward it. If he ran at full speed, he could escape, but the white armor caught up right behind them, its mouth wide open. Mo wondered how it could keep up with his speed. Then the monster nearly struck him. Mo questioned if this was happening because he was carrying old Joe. He picked him up in his arms, apologizing mentally, knowing he would have to throw him toward the door. Then he hurled old Joe with all of his strength. Joe went flying, shutting the door behind him. "What the hell is going on?" Mo shouted. He was crashing outside, knocked unconscious. Mo turned back toward the white armor, but the monster attacked with its head. The young man panted as he dodged the blow. The white armor kept repeating the word finger. Mo wondered if its power was connected to old Joe. He tried to understand why this was happening and how his ability worked. He recalled holding old Joe and realizing that without him, his speed increased, but his ability was limited. The monster turned to attack again. Mo blocked the strike, saying, "My condition has nothing to do with the white armor." It was clear now that when he threw old Joe, something strange happened, due to his energy activation. He wondered if there was some kind of connection between them. Noticing the pebbles on the ground, Mo finally understood his condition. In his past life, humans had faced the white armors with no chance of survival. All he could think about then was running. But now things were different. Now he was the hunter and no longer the prey. Mo grabbed a stone from the ground. This time he wasn't running. He readied an attack, gripping the pebble in his hand, taking a baseball stance, and charging his energy into the throw. Then he hurled it toward the creature. Mo's assumption was correct, just as he thought. His ability could only affect targets contaminated by his energy. With kinetic acceleration, the energy amplified, and even a tiny stone, when sped up to a certain degree, carried the power of an electromagnetic railgun. Blood splattered onto the ground. It was dripping from Mo's eye. He questioned what was happening, noticing that his blood was blue. Wanting to know what the hell was going on, Mo collapsed onto the ground. He vomited blood, falling unconscious, unable to move. His last thought was about how cold he felt. But before his vision completely darkened, old Joe approached. He held the young man, calling him Lin and telling him to open his eyes. Inside Joe's house, his wife commented that the wind was too strong. "At this rate, we can't take him to a hospital." Meanwhile, the boys struggled to get the main door open. Joe ordered them to block the wind and turn on the heating. His wife worriedly remarked that the boy looked poisoned. They shouted for him not to fall asleep. The officer found Mrs. Fang and started talking about Linmo, but the woman cut him off. "Stop talking, and go find Xiao Ju." Xiao approached, asking Joe to excuse him. She told Joe to leave Linmo there, and Joe commented that the boy would be fine. The doctor continued, saying the officer should check the stairs because it was a mess. Despite his body temperature being so low, he was still alive. She wondered if he was some kind of cryogenic person. The doctor began recording a report stating that the male patient was suspected of poisoning and was still in a coma. His vital systems were abnormal, and his body temperature was around 10 degrees Celsius. However, his pulse and nerve reflexes were in normal condition. She turned off the phone, saying it was unbelievable. The blood separation process was complete, and she needed to check the result. She realized it was something she had never seen before. Before centrifuging, the blood had looked no different from normal blood, but afterward, blue impurities had separated. Since the analysis would take time, she needed to continue observing the patient's surface characteristics. Even on his body, if not looked at closely, the markings could be mistaken for veins. But upon closer inspection, they resembled an allergic reaction. Suddenly, Linmo opened his eyes. The doctor asked, "Have you finally woken up?" The young man tried to understand what was happening to him. The woman continued, "Don't walk around like a headless chicken." Linmo wanted to know who she was, but Shio lit a cigarette. "I'm an unlicensed doctor," she said. "For some reason, I can't reveal my real name, but you can call me Dr. J." She then asked, "How did you end up in this state? To be honest, I've never seen these symptoms before. What happened in the basement? I'm very interested in you." In Brooklyn, the temperature had dropped to minus 29 degrees Celsius. The world record for the lowest human body temperature was 13.7 degrees Celsius. While the human body could tolerate 0 degrees Celsius, prolonged exposure froze tissue and destroyed cells. Temperatures below 32 degrees Celsius caused hypothermia, and humans couldn't survive at minus 29 degrees Celsius or with a body temperature lower than 13.7 degrees Celsius. After explaining this, the doctor removed the thermometer from Mo's mouth. "Take a look," she told him. His current body temperature was 11.5 degrees Celsius. It was a miracle he was still alive. Linmo could only wonder how this was possible. He tried to figure out if it was because of his ability, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. He needed to complete his plan quickly. Dr. Joe smirked. "I understand," she said. Linmo then slipped on the water on the floor, falling and hitting his head. Sue turned around annoyed. "I told you not to move. Your body is weak." But that wasn't the real issue. She had discovered what was wrong with him. She asked, "Do you have a superpower?" The boy was shocked. "How do you know?" He wondered, but he didn't have time to waste on her. He scoffed. "What kind of joke is this?" Dr. Joe explained, "I've been observing you as a doctor." The young man thought that as long as his ability was active, even if he had to climb everything again, it would be faster. But then blue blood dripped onto the floor. The doctor asked, "Are you okay?" as he coughed up blood. Linmo realized he couldn't accelerate now. Based on his past experiences, he knew what was about to happen. Meanwhile, Don walked toward a door, saying, after meeting with Dr. J, they needed to behave a little better. His subordinates understood. Then he stopped in front of apartment 509. Inside were Ju and Linmo. The young man was startled, wondering what was about to happen, but Che gritted her teeth and told him to get up. He needed to move, asking for Lin's hand. Lin sat up on the stretcher, asking what the problem was, but the doctor ordered him to lie back down. There was no more room for questions. The young man needed to understand why all of this was happening so suddenly. Joe told him that if he wanted to survive, he had to do exactly what she said. She told him to wait and not move under any circumstances. Then she pressed the button to open the door. Ludong stepped inside, apologizing for the intrusion. He was greeted by Dr. J, who asked what he wanted. The man asked if he could come in for a quick chat, and the woman told him to do as he pleased. Inside the house, J asked what he needed. The gangster explained that he had heard the resident of apartment 409 was receiving treatment and had something to discuss with him. Zhao replied that the person he was looking for had died from poisoning. Dong simply sighed, saying, "That's unfortunate." Linmo recognized Ludong's voice and wondered why he had appeared here. In his previous life, he had been completely frozen before showing up. If he could use his acceleration ability now, he could take Dong's life himself. The gangster noticed something strange and turned around. "Dr. Giello had been working hard all this time," he said, "but I saw the patient blink. I wanted to be sure he was lifeless. What do you think about me helping to check?" Joe responded, "I already told you the truth." Then Dong pressed the ignition of her lighter and said, "The doctor has saved so many of my brothers on the street. There's no way to repay her. It's my fault. She shouldn't be upset, but she shouldn't forget who's taking care of the clinic and her. So I'm giving a quick answer about something." He left the apartment, telling her to think about it. Ju complained that it was nonsense, but told Linmo to get up, as Dong had already left. She thought he had many questions to ask. Linmo asked, "Why did Dong want to take my life this time? There was no reason like in my past life. And why is Joe protecting me?" Before anything else, he asked, "Doctor, where are my clothes?" And she wonders if that would really be his first question. Brooklyn reaches minus 40 degrees Celsius. One of Dong's henchmen comments, "When I was young, I watched my father take care of the furnace. I thought I couldn't be a loser like him, but now I admire him." His friend replies, "It's just the messed up weather outside. You don't need to lay blame on your father." The Long asks, "Did you really think everything would improve in a few days?" The subordinate apologizes, but the man adds, "Government messages used to be broadcast every 20 minutes, and now even the internet has stopped, as if they'd given up. This sudden cold wave, it must be God's punishment for humanity." Joe, who is tied up, asks, "Why doesn't God punish a sinner like me?" Then Dong approaches and says, "I was just managing the apartment. I wanted to know if the order I created wasn't harmonious." The officer complains, "You ordered everyone to leave and get supplies for you, or you'd cut off the heating." The gangster asks, "Wasn't it fair?" An equivalent exchange. Joe simply calls him a parasite. Dong turns around saying, "It's a shame Lin wasn't among them. Otherwise, he could be benefiting from someone else." Leaving Joe in shock because of that, Joe asks if Lin was already dressed. He tells him to come to her when he's done, but the young man was struggling, eager to get dressed. He asks, what did she need? The doctor wanted to know if he had any idea how long he had been unconscious. The young man guesses 6 hours, but she replies it has been 6 whole days, completely surprising him. She then explains everything that happened during those days. Since Dawn controlled the heating system, forcing residents to trade supplies for it, many people were forced to go outside. That was as good as losing their lives willingly, since those who went out thought they were going to heaven anyway. Lin curses him, saying, "No matter where you were, you're still a beast." Then he asked if there was any way to recover his body. Joe smiles, cigarette still in her mouth, and says, "Yes, but if you want me to tell you, there has to be a condition. I run an underground clinic. I don't do charity." She asks, "Would you accept?" Lin Mo asks, "What's the condition?" He adds, "I'll agree as long as I can do it." Then she holds his chin and says, "You have to be my research subject. You'll allow only me to study you." Reassuring him that her research wouldn't bring him any harm, she emphasized, as she had said, that she was very interested in him. Lin Mo, with a smile, responds, "The deal is done." The woman then explains, "There is a special substance in your blood, but I haven't yet discovered what it is. What is certain is that it absorbs thermal radiation and converts thermal energy into usable energy for the entire body, but absorbing too much makes your body cold." Simply put, his body had suddenly gained a way to store energy, so he was just hungry. Lin Mo asks, "Will eating be enough to recover?" The doctor agrees, but adds, "The amount you need to eat would be huge, and I don't have that much food." The man tells her, "Don't worry, I'll figure it out." Then he heads toward his apartment through the emergency stairs, thinking that it was good he had prepared in advance and planned to go to the supermarket for some supplies. Moving stealthily to avoid Dong's henchmen, he knew that as long as he got home safely, it would be a victory. Opening the door of apartment 409 and pressing the button on his key, he notices that everything inside was frozen. Lin Mo wonders, did they cut off the heating in my room? Because that could freeze someone to death. But because of Dong, his room had turned into an igloo. He opened a box, which he said contained the highest calorie food. Inside were stacks of chocolate bars. He remembered Ming Ming and muttered to himself, "I need to change this brand the next time I buy chocolate." Then, with all of his strength, he bit into the bar. However, there was no reaction. It seemed like that amount wasn't enough. He needed to increase the dose. So he did, eating chocolate nonstop. He could feel a sensation building, as if something inside his body was creating heat. It was a bad feeling. It felt like he was about to lose control. The henchman opened the apartment door, asking, why was it unlocked? The boss was planning to cut off the man's fingers to force it open, but today it just opened on its own, and there are tons of supplies inside. Lin Mo smirked while eating the last piece of chocolate. The henchmen readied their weapons, demanding, "Who are you? How did you open the door?" Meanwhile, Jo was in her lab, reflecting on the final simulation report. It was ready. She needed to see exactly what was inside his body. As she examined the data, she noticed that the reversal process had affected his neural activity. That was bad. If too much glycogen had been replenished, he would become different. One of the henchmen yelled that it didn't matter who he was because everything there belonged to them. But Lin Mo's previously bluish energy turned red as he entered a state of madness. 72 hours earlier, Jo went to the boiler room and asked, "What the hell happened here to turn room 409 into this?" Noticing something strange forming on the floor, he wanted to know what it was. He collected it as a sample, saying, "This is interesting." However, a camera was pointed at the place. She said, "Looks like I'll have to go to the security room to find out the truth from the recorder." A man started an announcement telling all residents to pay attention. He urged them to distribute supplies rationally to avoid waste. Dong's henchman grabbed Jo by the arms, saying he was too heavy, but his friend reminded him, "Don't forget what the boss said. Keep an eye on the boiler. The man continued, all residents must pay a small compensation in exchange for heating. A drunk man asked, is this some kind of joke from Joe? But his colleague replied, doesn't seem like the old man. Then the gangster explained so that everyone understood the seriousness of the situation. Walking over to the heating switch, he said he would turn it off for a while to save some resources. With his lunatic expression, he shuts it down. Lin suddenly wakes up, facing a man who asks, do you hate him? The boy, dressed like a prisoner, asks, what am I supposed to hate? The figure asks again, do you hate Dom? Repeating the name, Lu Dom, Linmo replies, it's obvious I hate him. He grabs one of the henchmen by the neck while emanating his energy. The henchman is surrounded by a red aura. Linmo's eye turns the same color. He thinks about how the henchman was lubed, mumbling that human flesh and beef taste similar. Then he hurls the man far away, sending him out of the building. The henchman crashes to the ground, burning in red energy. Outside, people are shocked, seeing the completely charred body in front of the building. They say he looks like he fell from the 4th floor. His friend asks, what the hell just happened? Who is Lin Mo? Wondering if he's an alien, he approaches him. He notices the energy and questions, is that a red aurora? Quickly realizing there's no way to win against Lin Mo, he rushes at him, planning to do whatever he couldn't. But the hooded figure smiles, seeing the image of Lu alongside the henchman. He uses his speed to appear behind him, shocking the boy with his incredible agility. Lin Mo, the figure calls. Come at me. He tries to provoke the boy. The henchman swings at him, but the man is no longer there. Lin Mo attempts to strike again. Suddenly, the hooded figure appears behind him. Don't move, Lin Mo tells Lu DeLong, his voice urgent. The hooded figure prepares his hand, stretching it back as the henchman runs toward him. Then, with a flash of speed, he activates his power with his eye, dashing forward and slicing the man's body in half. The door suddenly opens. Ming Ming. Lin Mo calls out, shocked by her sudden presence. She looks at him, her gun trained on his chest. Without hesitation, she shoots a dart toward his stomach. Why? Lin Mo asks, his voice laced with confusion. Joe's voice answers, calm and measured, it was just insulin. Lin Mo's aura dissipates as the dart takes effect. He collapses into her arms, his energy fading. The doctor explains it was to break down the excess heat in your body. But as Lin Mo drifts into unconsciousness, Ming Ming stares ahead, astonished. All the plants had bloomed. She wanted to know what had happened here. Hunger is a catalyst for human atrocities, she murmurs to herself, reflecting on history's repeating cycle of horrors, from cannibalism to wars, the dark threads that run through human nature. But as agricultural technology developed, human society gradually stabilized. However, hunger never left them. For in a frozen world, cultivation was an almost impossible task. History was about to repeat itself, but there is always an exception. So Lin Mo sleeps with his head resting on the plants. Joe comments, you haven't been awake for long. You'll have to sleep a little more. He apologizes but adds, I just want to know what all of this is. Picking up a tomato with her hands, she takes a bite. Shortly after, the doctor tries to analyze the taste, saying, it's not bad at all. The quantity is enough to feed the entire building. 2 people walk through the snow. The stomach of a girl growls, and she feels embarrassed by the sound. Her partner asks, how are you feeling? Can you hold on? The girl simply replies, it shouldn't be a problem. Then her friend touches his coat and says, I just remembered a chocolate bar. She tries to be polite and refuses, but the man continues, it was almost taken by Don. I thought it was in this coat. His wife tells him to stop looking and asks, don't you remember? We gave the chocolate bar to our daughter this morning. The husband turns to her, stunned. Then he laughs, saying he completely forgot. Depreciating himself, he says he's useless, while a claw appears beside his head, destroying the man's face with a single strike. His wife stands in despair at what just happened. After all, they were facing a massive white-armored creature that held her husband in its hand, then devoured the rest of his body. His blood splatters onto her face, and the white-armored creature says, you look delicious. The woman looks up and asks, what was that thing? But someone blonde yells at her, don't stand still. She turns toward the voice and runs to escape the monster. The blonde shouts for the girl to come to him, telling her to run if she wants to live. The woman runs from the white-armored creature, but the monster tries to grab her with its hands. She glances back, tripping in the snow and tumbling away. She falls hard onto the ground and struggles to get up, while the monster chases after her, crying as she pleads for her life. The blonde grabs a bottle of alcohol with a rag, ignites it with a lighter, and throws it toward the creature. It hits, triggering an explosion. Sparks and fire land on the woman as the creature is engulfed in flames, screaming that it hates the heat. Giving the wife a chance to escape, she faced the building. She felt the monster might not have followed her. Seeing an elevator, she wondered if she could be saved, but the monster was still behind her. The woman, completely shocked, desperately wanted to live. She cried again and repeatedly pressed the elevator button. The white armored creature kept calling out to her. The girl screamed at the elevator to hurry up, but then the blonde appeared. Close your eyes, he ordered, completely surprising the woman who wasn't expecting it. Lights began to flash, blinding the creature. It screamed that it hated the brightness. The blonde raised his hand, holding a pick between his fingers, getting ready to play a rock song. Then he strummed his guitar, sending sound waves forward. The creature screamed again, this time in agony. I hate rock, it cried. The woman's name was Dorothy Perez, and her childhood dream had been to become a doctor. After growing up, she became a nurse, but she was unhappy with everything around her. Then she met Matt. He ate his food shyly beside her, and she, too, seemed excited to be by his side. After that, they got married. Then their daughter was born. Finally, they even moved to a new apartment. But it was something she knew very well. Whether the world suddenly froze over or criminals invaded the apartment, she feared what would come next after going through so much. Wanting to understand what was happening now, she couldn't shake the thought that the man with just a guitar had managed to suppress that monster. That was definitely the most ridiculous thing of all. The man finished his song, raising his hand high into the air. Then the creature tried to grab him, saying that noise was irritating. But panting from his little performance, the man simply stepped on a button on the floor, releasing metal rods from the ceiling. They shot toward the creature, piercing it and catching it off guard, trapping the white armored monster among the wreckage. The monster's hand trembled in its final moments. Dorothy, astonished, asked, "Is it over?" She collapsed to the ground, crying, saying that it was finally finished. But she still looked ahead cautiously, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. The blonde extended his hand toward her, telling her, "It's fine now." Dorothy sat in front of the campfire, lost in thought. She looked at a picture of her family, her husband's face covered in blood. The man handed her a cloth, telling her, "Let him rest in peace." Sitting beside her, he continues speaking, "Because from dust to dust, from ashes to ashes, we need to protect the living beyond, mourning the ones who lost their lives." Dorothy looks at him with a strange expression. Then the man lights his cigarette and tells her not to worry, creating an awkward atmosphere between them. Dorothy introduces herself while the blonde stammers a bit, saying that she could call him Corbin. The woman thanks him while looking to the side, and Corbin accepts her gratitude. Dorothy asks, "Were you also going out to look for supplies?" Corbin hesitates before replying. "My situation is a little complicated." He opens his guitar case and adds, "Give me a second to show you something. I came from Seattle searching for a friend, but as soon as I arrived, I got trapped by the cold wave." He hands her a photo. "This is my friend," he says, pointing to the man wearing the hat. "We used to play together in a band during high school." Dorothy immediately recognizes Lin Mo in the photo. "That's the guy who lived in apartment 409, she says. Suddenly, a loud noise shakes both of them. The entire city trembles from the event. Corgan asks, "What's happening?" His voice is tense as he looks around. What are those things? A white armored monster stomps on the ground nearby. While another has its neck slashed open and a third has elongated arms, a whole army of pale-skinned creatures advances. Dorothy notices the direction they are heading toward the apartment building. Lingmo finally wakes up, wondering how he passed out. In front of him is a woman's body. Startled, he tries to understand what is going on. Tio finishes something behind him, asks, "Were you awake already? I put something on you." Lingmo questions what was placed on him, but he's restrained in a chair. The doctor tells him, "I installed a safety measure, revealing a collar around his neck. Collars are one of the oldest ornamental pieces, and their meaning has always changed. In the past, they were a symbol of slavery representing control and ownership, but now they can also be a toy for adults." Jiao says, "You shouldn't worry. The collar on your neck is definitely not for those purposes." Limo asks about it, thinking he wouldn't have thought that way if she hadn't said anything. He tells her, "I agreed to be your research subject, but not for this." The doctor explains the collar is a special monitoring tool, your research arch subject. She asked if he remembered the things inside his body, because they helped him absorb heat and store it. However, it seemed to have another function. This collar was made to prove that hypothesis. When his blood sugar levels were high, it would activate another state, and the collar would change from blue to red. Linmo asked what she was talking about and what this other state was. The doctor then questioned if he remembered what happened 20 minutes ago. The young man was surprised by the question, noticing he couldn't recall what had happened. Joe told him not to worry, placing her finger on his face. "It's fine if you don't remember," she said. "I was here to figure out what was happening because all of this is part of my research." Limo thought that he always felt like this woman had some control over him, but he really wanted to know what was going on. Once he found out, he would definitely gain some advantage over her. Joe pressed a button on her keyboard, injecting something into Linmo's bloodstream. The young man glanced to the side and saw an IV drip. He questioned what it was, noticing that it was glucose with a 25% concentration. The doctor turned, noticing his reaction to the cause. She said that she would first record the data, while Lin Mo only wanted to know what was happening. Joe smiled and said she had almost forgotten something. She knelt in front of Lin Mo, surprising him. He asked what she was planning, and then the woman placed a small potted plant in front of him, catching him off guard with the sudden action. Lin Mo immediately looked at the plant. His gaze began to turn red along with the marks on his body. A red energy filled the room. "The doctor dared to deceive me," he shouted. But at that moment, his other self appeared, remarking that it was interesting. Stepping out from behind, the figure walked toward Lin Mo, touched the plant's small branch, and caused it to grow and bear tomatoes. "Can you see me now?" he asked. "What's going on?" Lin Mo asked, and the other self replied, "It's nice to meet again." "Are you my other self?" Lin Mo questioned. He tried to tell the doctor that he was hallucinating, but the other self explained that the doctor could not hear him. Lin Mo tested it himself and realized there was indeed no reaction when he spoke. "Is this the work of that entity?" he asked. "In a way, yes," the other self said, "but not entirely." "What do you mean by not entirely?" Lin Mo pressed. And who he was, besides the fact that they looked the same, the being explains that they were both together, to be exact. After all, alone he couldn't have reached this level. He pulls down his hood, saying that regarding his identity, that should reveal who he was. Lin Mo is shocked when he sees. After all, his other self's eyes were bluish. He asks if Lin remembers. The young man says that he was the parasite from back in the cave. The parasite confirms it, showing the mark on Lin Mo's back. He explains that his powers and the ability to resurrect were thanks to him, transforming into a woman. She tells them both to get along. The National Security and Logistics Bureau was a branch of the agency, also known as ASLN, and was one of the few departments that could operate independently. The logistics agency had its own medical unit, administrative units with capable people, and even military units. This agency was considered the last safeguard of civilization in the world after the government collapse. And someone calls out to Stalu asking if the network had not yet been restored. While the woman had a photo of herself and Jew on her desk, Shalu said that Miss Barbara had asked the same question 28 times in the last 2 days. Then Barbara sighed, looking at her partner. Shalu began to explain about the information department and a hardware issue, but Barbara shouted that she already understood. "I have the surname Ripley. I'm a level 4 leader in biochemistry," she said. To be honest, they were just passing responsibility around. Barbara asked if the report was complete. Shalu replied that it was almost ready. "Good enough," Barbara said, "but it should be sent to me first." Her subordinate questioned, "What about the rest?" With disdain in her voice, Barbara responded, "The bald guy wouldn't read it seriously anyway. The situation is urgent." She then opened a government document. She thought to herself, it's all starting again. Her bald boss complained, "This isn't the time to discuss such things." Frank Kordick, a level 2 minister, shouted, "First, there were climate changes. Then cyber attacks rendered communication useless. Even the frontline operators have been out of contact for 48 hours. Not to mention our agents weren't properly activated." He paused, looking around. "We're in trouble. We need to back them up." He sighed. "War never changes, and neither do my soldiers." But before he could finish, Barbara kicked him straight to his lower parts, saying that he shouldn't be worrying about political matters right now. In the sample observation room, she asks if he understands her urgency. Frank stares ahead, stunned. Barbara explains that the white armored creature was found near the bunkers. The monster merely repeats that it was just a husk. Shalu says the creature was a mutated human. Frank questions this, but Barbara tells him to look at the monster's neck. The bald man starts to focus, noticing a collar on the creature. He identifies it as a member of the Field Operations Department. He wants to know what was going on there, and Harbor explains that it happened before the network went down. A signal from a missing agent was detected near the bunker, but when the department found his body, he was already lifeless. His codename was Silverhammer. She explains that 24 hours later, the body underwent a mutation and became what they were watching now. Shalu adds that they had obtained some information from the CIA. This creature had been monitored even before the Cold Way and other related events. That footage was from the same supermarket, and those two were the first monsters temporarily referred to as husks. An image of Lin Mo appears on the screen, and she says they had been calling him number 0. The young man wonders what was going on there. Just a second ago, the parasite had been an insect, but now it had turned into a woman, who he actually found quite beautiful. The parasite smiles while looking at Lin Mo and says, "Humans get shy when they see the opposite sex naked." She then sits on the young man's lap, making him wonder if it was an illusion. The surroundings seemed as if time had frozen. The parasite says, "You could think of it that way." Lin Mo is startled and asks, "Can you hear what I'm thinking?" The parasite explains, "Yes, I can. We're now fused." Lin Mo complains that explanation is weird. The woman responds, "You can only see me because of Jiao's sugar." Linmo realizes it was an illusion and asks, has the parasite been activated? She twirls her hair in her hand and says, strictly speaking, that's your blood. It's the part that granted you your abilities. The young man asks, why are you parasitizing my body? The woman answers, you are a curious creature. I'm different from humans and I don't belong to this dimension. Linmo repeats in disbelief, you don't belong to this dimension? The parasite continues, we need to parasitize the bodies of natives to gain the ability to understand this dimension. The young man complains that it sounded like something out of a cheap romance novel. The parasite says, our race has no name or definition. We travel between dimensions without perceiving time, yet we are unable to interfere. We need hosts to break barriers. She pauses, then adds, it must be hard for humans to understand. You wanted to hear your own names and see the castles built over time, but you couldn't interfere with the world. How could you prove your own existence? Linmo asks, is this existentialist philosophy? Because from what you're saying, it sounds like you're quite lonely. The parasite is suddenly surprised and bursts into laughter. Are you feeling sorry for me? Is this what you humans call empathy? She smirks. Choosing humans as hosts seems to have been the right answer. She embraces him, smiling. Your current expression is cute. But then her tone shifts and she says, I have some bad news. Since the moment we fuse, you become a target for the husks. Outside, the white armored creatures advance toward the apartment. They take the form of wolves that gather together. Their leader comments, the scent here is of food, but I also smell an enemy. He turns to his group, move toward the building. The creatures crash into the structure. Limo asks, what did the parasite mean by husks? She responds, you'll find out soon enough. But if you need anything, you can seek me out now. You know how. Then the parasite claps her hands and time resumes its normal flow. Meanwhile, a vial falls close to the ground. A severed head lands beside it. A girl runs away from a white armored creature. In a corridor filled with lifeless bodies from the sudden attack, the building's residents scramble, rushing down the stairs. But a man is cornered by two monsters banging on the door. He shouts, it locked itself at the worst possible moment. The white armored creatures finally reach him, piercing his body as they break through the door. Luke DeLong's subordinates have been taken care of by Officer Joe, but they prepare to fight as the creatures invade. What the hell are those things? One of them asks. Joe watches as the two men are impaled by the monsters, his mind racing. What are those things? They look like the creature from before. He notices red points on the monsters, wondering, are they sucking blood? The monsters haven't noticed him yet. He knows he needs to find a way to escape. Breaking the rope without tools will be difficult, and the pillar has no sharp edges. So he decides to resort to an old trick from his youth. Gripping his thumb with the other hand, he pushes it downward to dislocate it, freeing his hand from the rope with ease. Joe says, it was good to have those old injuries from my youth. Now my fingers tend to dislocate easily. He tries to move stealthily since the monsters don't seem to have noticed him. However, he realizes that in this situation, he can't leave empty-handed. Joe thinks he needs to find the security vault. Luckily, the thieves hadn't realized it was a weapons cabinet. But then, a white armored creature appears in front of him. Joe versus the whole situation out loud. Meanwhile, he comments, just as I suspected, the plants respond to my influence, capable of growing rapidly. Limo asks, could you undo everything? The doctor says, oh, I can do it. The boy can't use the ability for long periods or he'll end up weakened. I've collected most of the data I needed. Linmo yells at her, hurry up and help me undo it. A tremor shakes the room. Joe questions, what was that sound? The door of the room begins to rattle. Frightened, the doctor asks, what's happening? Linmo is surprised and asks, could it be a monster? One suddenly appears in the room. He notices that it is a white armor. The parasite whispers in his ear that it is the shell. Linmo turns around asking, why is she still here? But the creature puts a finger to his lips, saying, this is not the time to be thinking about that. If you don't act fast, Zhao will lose his life. Linmo activates his ability and rushes forward, questioning, why are all the women around me so difficult? He picks Shu up in his arms, apologizing and asking for her permission. Then he flees far away using his powers. The creature attacks the wall. Since Gio is no longer in front of it, Linmo lands on the ground, still holding the girl and asks, are you okay? However, he notices the girl's embarrassed expression. She touches his chest and says, it was fun to experience your ability like that. Linmo helps her up and they both face the monster. Zhao questions, what is it? Her friend responds, I don't know, but it is definitely dangerous. He calls for Dr. Ju while stepping in front, determined to deal with the creature. Zhao reminds him, you shouldn't overuse your abilities. The boy agrees, saying, I want to tell you something, although you are a bit clumsy, judging by the results. She really helped a lot, and he thanks Dr. Joe. She is completely surprised by this and questions, why are you bringing this up now? Limo prepares for battle. We can deal with those small matters later, he says. I'll make sure to properly thank you. Several white-skinned creatures appear in the room to face him. The boy is taken aback by this. He wonders if it's a collective action. Dealing with one had been easy, but with so many, he might fall into a weakened state again. Joe asks, "What's wrong?" "You are eager to see how I would thank you." Limbo replies, "Maybe you should wait a little longer." Then the monsters charge at him. Realizing he will have to face the white armored creatures head on, he takes a combat stance. Joe picks up the tablet and says, "Since this is the case, you should test his limits. Monitor his glycogen at 100%. Limbo dodges one of the creatures. He thinks that if he keeps using acceleration continuously, he will end up weakened before finishing them. But then he grabs one of the monsters. "I have a way," he says. "I only need to use the power when necessary." He throws the creature toward its group. The monsters regroup to attack. Limbo thinks they're not as dumb as they seem. But he is no longer the monster's prey. Limbo activates acceleration in his eye, noticing that when the ability is activated, time slows down for him. This allows him to observe the beast's movements and predict their attacks. Thus, he dodges the strikes, realizing that with this, he doesn't even need full-body acceleration. The same applies to his attacks. He advances against the creatures again, even unarmed. As long as he accelerates his fist to a certain degree, he can trigger a supersonic explosion, destroying everything in the room. Limbo turns to the remaining beasts and asks, "Are you afraid now? I'm just getting started." Joe, analyzing the data, comments, "Although calorie consumption hasn't decreased, the efficiency of ability usage has been optimized. In all this time, you consumed less than 10% of your energy." She smiles, finding this interesting. "You're a test subject," she says. "You can unleash yourself with that previous move." Limbo complains, "As I suspected, you were monitoring my body condition." The beast charges at the boy, who prepares his strike, shouting, "The doctor is a fraud," and unleashing a blast of power. Limbo takes a deep breath after the attack. The veins in his neck have already turned blue, and his arm is still consumed by energy. But his glucose consumption is still at 83%. The doctor approaches, saying he has mastered his abilities very well. The boy just turns to look at the woman. She continues, saying she has a question, since he seems to know a lot about these things. She orders her test subject to tell her everything he knows, exhaling smoke from her cigarette. In the boiler room, the body of the white armored creature stretches out in blood. Joe is unconscious, lying beneath the monster. Suddenly, he opens his eyes. Looking around, he asks what is happening and notices the blood on the floor. He pulls the knife from the monster's belly. While trying to understand what just happened, he moves the monster aside. He remembers the fight he had against the creature, and that if he hadn't had the lever, he would have been finished. He walks out of the room, thinking about what would happen if the monsters appeared again and he wasn't as lucky. A vibration comes from the phone in his pocket, making the man question whether the network was still down. But the call was from an unknown number. Joe puts the phone back in his pocket, and the caller greets him with a "Good morning, Josh Castillo," asking if he should call him Mr. Curved Blade. Limbo explains everything he knows to G, thinking that he wouldn't mention having lost his life once and traveled through time. The doctor changes her outfit and comments, "I expected as much, but if you're done talking, help me with the zipper." The young man zips it up while she explains, "It was a prototype environmental protection suit from my previous job." Lynn questions the sudden outfit change. Joe tells him to look at the ceiling, since the white-skinned creatures had invaded the vents. "They might have damaged the ventilation," he says. "Didn't you notice the temperature drop?" A noise is heard outside. Both go to the door, finding Dorothy's daughter. Joe comments, "It's just a child." Lynn says, "She's my neighbor." The little girl runs, and the young man chases after her while the doctor mutters, "I hate kids." Lynn is surprised when he looks down the hallway. The path is covered in blood. The little girl is pointing. So notices several corpses on the floor and says they're residents of the building. Lynn wonders why all of them have gunshot wounds. He approaches the child, telling her it's dangerous around here. But the girl points to old Joe, who is lying on the ground. Lynn thinks he had already lost his life. In his previous life, it had been Joe who took the initiative to share food. But Joe had also lost to a white-armored creature. So Lynn touches the body's shoulder, saying, "In the end, good people never get a happy ending." Suddenly, Joe grabs Lynn's hand, startling him and making him scream dramatically. The old man explains, "I haven't passed on yet, but I still owe you one." A little girl grabs Joe's hand and asks, "Are you a doctor?" "My mother said that doctors wear clothes with red crosses, and you have one on the back of your hand. Can you help Uncle Joe?" Saul looks at the child without reacting, but then she steps closer and says, "I'll make an exception. I won't charge anything." She kneels beside Joe and asks, "What happened to leave you in this state?" Joe sighs. "It's a long story. After leaving the boiler room, my plan was to get to the security room, but the first floor was full of monsters. I ended up climbing the emergency stairs and found several survivors along the way. and since the monsters were coming, his only option was to keep going up. But that's when something happened. Lutong appeared with a firearm, shooting survivors in the head as they climbed the stairs, leaving the bodies for the white armored creatures to devour. Joe asked, "What are you doing?" Dong simply commented, "I'm using the weak to buy myself time, shooting at the other survivors along the way." While aiming at the girl, he said, "The strong have always been above the weak. It's a rule established by God." He fired again, hitting Joe, who stepped in front of the shot. After that, Dong continued climbing while Joe lay there bleeding until he lost consciousness. Jiao said, "Fortunately, the bullet didn't hit a vital point, but he lost a lot of blood. He needs to get to a safe place." Limo repeated the name Lu Dong with rage, stepping forward. Joe asked, "What are you going to do?" The young man looked back while activating his abilities. Lu Dong shot at others along the way who screamed for him to wait, crying, "We're human." Dong contradicted them, "You're just weak meat. Having bodies everywhere is good. It's enough to slow the monsters down." Because although that place was an old warehouse, it should be the safest spot in the building. He opens a door, hoping to find supplies inside, but he notices a dark presence coming from the hallway. Lin-Mo pulls down his hood, saying, "I'm facing the man once again," calling out to Lu along with anger. The gangster fires at the young man, asking, "Weren't you supposed to be in hell?" But Lin dodges all the shots while charging toward Dong, landing a kick that severs his leg. Then, lunging forward with his hand shaped like a claw, he slices off the arm holding the gun and grabs Dong's head with his hand. The man asks, "Why are you doing this?" while Lin heads toward the balcony since he hadn't even done anything to him yet. Lidvo questions, "How can you say you haven't done anything?" But then he realizes that nothing from his previous life has happened yet. After coming back, he never sought revenge. He only wanted to create a safe place for himself. However, looking at the situation now, he realizes how foolish he had been. Innocent people had lost their lives, and all of this made him furious. But it was clear his anger wasn't just toward Dong. He also felt anger toward himself for being such an idiot. Burning Dong's body with his power, he hurls it toward the white-skinned creatures, declaring, "Now." If he were to do it again, he would do the same to his enemy 100 times over. That was the law of the frozen world. Joe and the little girl warmed themselves by the fire. So commented the building manager used this place as a storage room. It might still be useful to us, since there are some supplies left. Limo sat in the corner near a crate, thinking about how he had finally gotten his revenge. But it didn't feel like enough. The doctor interrupted him by smacking his head. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I already suspected you had issues with that bastard. It's normal for people to become impulsive when they have great power, but in your case, it's different." "Thank you for getting rid of Dylon," Limo said. "Do you have problems with him too?" The woman's mind drifted back to moments from her past, times when he had pointed a gun at people. Limo stood up. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." They would be staying there for now. Since the place had been used as storage, the heater didn't work. Still, everything seemed intact. But old Joe was injured, and Maggie was just a child. They couldn't rely on the fire in the barrel forever, especially with the dangerous white-skinned creatures lurking outside. They needed to reinforce the room security, and they could use the available materials for that. However, if they wanted real warmth, they needed to go to the power room. Joe comments, "The building is full of monsters. I fear what could happen if we don't do something about it." Maggie suddenly sneezes while they are talking. Lynn says, "You could end up with hypothermia if you stay still like that." Joe explains, "There's only one way. Inside a garbage tunnel, footsteps are heard. Mo suddenly falls out, landing face first on the ground, grumbling about it being the garbage tunnel of all places. But he is surprised when he looks ahead. He sees a creature that looks like a core and wonders if the white-skinned beings have fused with the residents, forming a nest. He turns around, noticing a strange noise. He wonders if it could be a white-armored creature. But Juice suddenly falls on top of him. On the ground, Lin comments, "The doctor is stopping him from getting up." The doctor retorts, "I can move if you take your hand off me." A sudden noise is heard, and she signals for Lin to stay silent. The creature looks to the side, passing by them unnoticed. Joe asks, "What was that thing?" Lin wants to know, "Why did I even come here?" She explains that 2 people are needed to operate the power room. Since Lin's body is in a weakened state, he might pass out there. The monster suddenly charges toward the wall where they are hiding. The young man wonders what kind of monster that is, as it is different from the other white-armored creatures. He is too weak to fight it now and could end up dead. According to the doctor, the white-armored creatures don't eat people. They only drain and store their blood, but he wonders where all that blood is going. Maggie looks out the window and asks Joe, what is happening? She shocks the old man with the terrifying sight. The white-armored creatures are spreading across the building, and a female is lying on the ground with an immense belly. Corbin comments, she looks lifeless. Dorothy says, she won't attack them anymore. However, a light appears from the building and a man is identified by Morse code. Dorothy asks about Morse and Corbin explains it's a signal language that allows communication through different letters of the alphabet and numbers, depending on the pattern used. Joe from the window signals with the light, saying that they should understand and not go there. Corp is surprised by the code and Dorothy questions, "What are they trying to say?" The young man understands little, but tells the woman that they are being asked to go there. Both move toward the building while Dorothy appears hesitant. Corbin says that her daughter should be there, but Joan does not want the two of them to take that path. Still in the nest, Lin thinks they need to follow that route. However, a white armored creature is blocking the entrance. He has no choice but to fight the monster. Cracking sounds come from the ceiling, drawing the creature's attention. Lin and Ju take the opportunity to move forward. Thinking that this was a perfect distraction, the doctor comments, the veins on the floor seem connected to those who lost their lives. Lin agrees, saying it's bizarre to use humans as part of a nest, when suddenly something emerges behind him. It is a white armored creature with a skeletal structure. It takes on a humanoid form. Resembling a lich, the creature shoves its hand into its own belly, pulling out intestines and using them to forge a sword. Then it swings the weapon downward. Lin senses something strange and curses the monster. He pushes Lin aside while accelerating his step. The creature charges to strike both of them, while the young man tries to reach Shu, getting slashed on his back to shield his friend from the attack. He steps back, holding on to the woman, saying that the monster is much faster than he is. That white armored creature is far stronger than the others. Lin places his hand on his own shoulder, thinking about how powerful that white armored creature is. The monster suddenly makes a sound, its vision entirely focused on Ju. Linmo wonders why its target is the doctor and not him, but the creature lunges forward with its sword. The young man manages to push Yo aside, but gets slashed by the sword. That monster is too fast, making it difficult for Lin to hold out. If the creature keeps attacking like this, both he and the doctor might lose their lives here. He wonders if he is about to die again. The parasite appears, talking about running away. It asks if that isn't what people of his kind do in situations like this. Because as it knows, in this frozen world, there is no mercy. It is a world where everyone is equal. So, if Lin abandons the doctor, he might still survive. Lin says that he won't run away because if he does that now, there would be no difference between him and Ludolong. He adds that he does not need to abandon his humanity to survive. Surprising the parasite with his response, Lin explains, "If you are part of me, you should understand. When innocent people lose their lives, his chest aches and he feels suffocated. That pain is his humanity suffering, just like the fossils of his ancestors, which bear fractures, proving they did not abandon their companions. Therefore, Lin can only think of one thing now. Since he has this power, he will use it to his advantage. Veins begin to form across his body and horns sprout from his head. The symbol on his necklace starts to be consumed by the veins as the white armored creature charges toward Ju with its sword. The doctor is frightened and begins sweating, but the creature's attack is blocked. A bluish white armored creature stands before her. Ju asks, "What is that?" "Lin is that monster," he declares. "With this power, I will protect people." He notices he looks similar to the white armored creature, but he clenches his fist. He doesn't feel the same as it. The young man releases energy into his hand, and his monstrous body takes on a blue glow. The parasite comments, "This is interesting. It seems I made the right choice in selecting you. Now, you will feel the essence of power." Lin charges to punch the creature, landing a blow that the monster defends against. He advances again, attempting a horizontal kick, but the monster dodges. Lin has become faster, but it is still not enough. As the monster continues to evade, Joe questions what is happening. He has created a new layer on his skin, as if absorbing energy from the air and converting it into power. Given the place they are in, she wonders if this is an unlimited energy source and what the essence of this power could be. Lin thinks that for now, he will put aside his resemblance to the white armored creatures as the monster strikes at him. Even with this power, it is difficult for Lin to defend himself and fight the creature. Dodging the monster's attack by a hair's breadth, Lin lands a grazing punch on the creature. They collide and Lin wonders if he can accelerate time. He questions whether he could do the opposite. The creature charges with a diagonal strike and then flees from Lin, heading straight toward Dr. Zhu without hesitation. Lin concentrates his energy into his fist, striking the creature's nest. The monster, just about to attack the woman, stops in time, only a centimeter away from hitting her. Lin thinks that it worked, but he prepares to run, saying, "This is it." He will finish the monster with a single strike, slashing multiple times across the creature's back, calling this attack Shadow Fist. Time returns to normal and an explosion occurs. Zhao falls to the ground, covered in the creature's blood. Lin extends his hand, saying, "We need to leave. We can't stay here." With the temperature reaching 26 degrees Celsius, Joe comments, "We did it." Maggie cheers. It's warm. She adds, I want to see my mother. A noise is heard in the cell. Joe asks, what's that? Could it be a white armored creature? Lynn opens the door, informing old Joe, I'm back. The old man greets him. You finally returned. But the young man asks, what happened to you? Joe tells him, don't get agitated. If the wound opens again, she'll have to stitch it up. Joe continues, a while ago, I heard a noise in the ducts. It could be a white armored creature. Lynn looks at the ducts, wondering about the noise. He says it could just be the old pipes settling. He tells old Joe, don't worry, probably just an illusion. The white-kin creatures were concentrated on the lower floors. However, the duct suddenly collapses. A strange figure falls in front of them. Joe raises his crowbar and says, I was right. Lynn activates his power and asks, did we turn into a blood nest? But Maggie calls out for her mother. Dorothy, she shouts. Dorothy responds, asking, what are you doing here? Meanwhile, Corbin complains, it's the heating duct, and it's way too hot. Maggie explains, a white armored creature invaded our home. A blonde uncle shot many uncles and aunts, but Uncle Joe saved me, though he got injured, and the dark-haired uncle saved him. Corbin calls Lynn Mo, you smelly brat. This surprises the young man, who wonders, how does someone know me? The blonde man rushes toward him and says, I miss you a lot. Lynn steps back, trying to recognize him, but Corbin hugs him, saying, I walked all the way from Aberdeen and crossed the entire continent. The young man immediately activates his ability, punching Corbin in the face. How dare you? He asks. He wonders, why does this person feel so familiar? The blonde asks, how could you do that? Not even my father hit me. Lynn wonders aloud, is this person from this timeline too, like the doctor? And seems to know him, but he'd never had any friends in Aberdeen. Corbin clings to Lynn's arm, saying, I'm going to form a new band. Mo will be the slashed right hand, and I'll be Hendrix's left hand. As Maggie asks, are the two of you friends? Lynn is shocked. He just wants to know who this blonde man is, noting that the differences in this timeline compared to before could be explained by the butterfly effect. After all, the future had been altered, but there was no explanation for Corbin. Saying that he could only ask the parasite, he enters his mental world and states, I have some questions for you. But receiving no answer, he reflects that she always appeared on her own. Yet when he looks for her now, she doesn't respond. The parasite is really selfish, he thinks. Cial interrupts them, saying, this is no time for reminiscing about the past. But Liv retorts, I don't even know him. Corbin complains, I came all this way just to have fun at my expense. However, the doctor asks about the current situation. Even though we solved the heating problem, there's now a much more serious one. Those white armored creatures seem to be the offspring of that mother, and these nests are sending blood to her. Soon, this building will be assimilated. If they keep ignoring this, Lynn finishes her sentence. Once the blood nests take over, they'll have to face the white armored creature with the intestine sword. He says, adding, if that's the case, with his power, he could take it on. Ju interrupts. It's not that simple. The indicator light is constantly blue. He continues, and after using Hishut, it shines even brighter. Lynn wonders aloud, is Heisha that black form? Does it also consume a lot of heat? Zhao confirms. Activating this state consumes a great amount of heat. Right now, there isn't enough, but I am the only one capable of fighting the white armored creatures, and the situation is dire. Mo reflects, if I want to survive and continue protecting, I need warmth. He pauses, then says, I have an idea. He asks the doctor, are there any spare planks? Joe replies, they're there, but why do you ask? Lin takes the sword from Joe's hand. Lend me the sacred sword of physics, he says. It doesn't matter whether it's the blood nest outside or the threat of the mutant white armored ones. The core of the problem, or the main conflict, is just one. He uses his power to advance and gather materials, as hunger was the best seasoning for those who lacked strength to work. Eating gave them strength. Joe says, I understand it was a hydroponic system. Lin's reasoning was truly unique, and Jay asks, are you going to cultivate here? The young man replies, it's about the value of honest workers and an innate ability. More and more people are joining, and solving the food problem is a priority. Reflecting on this, he knew what hungry people were capable of doing. Joe blows smoke in Lin's face and asks, what's the next step? The hydroponic system wouldn't produce food out of nowhere. The young man clenches his fists, ready to begin. As he walks through the building, he notices that, as expected, the bodies had disappeared, and there were no traces of blood. Something was collecting the bodies, and it could be that big guy from before. This meant he had little time. The blood nest would soon reach that floor, so he needed to act fast. Lin wanted to use the black form to eliminate the source completely, but before that, he needed to solve the problem of warmth and food. Corbin interrupts him, calling him Hugh, and asking where he was sneaking off to alone. Lin questioned how he followed him. The The blonde replied that everyone understood and Lin hadn't paid attention because he thought having a bad friend like him was embarrassing. However, he understood his friend now. Now that he worked at a big company, a beggar like him wasn't well regarded. Lin wanted to know what that had to do with this guy. Corbin continued, saying that now they were alone, he could speak freely, but the young man just found him annoying. The blonde placed a hand on his shoulder and asked, "Why wouldn't my brother speak?" Lin simply replied, "We're screwed." Standing face to face with the big guy in the blood nest room under a bridge, Corbin called Jerry. They were quite similar, having both been expelled and forced to hide under the bridge. From now on, you and the rat will depend on each other, but if you don't want to, you don't have to leave. Besides, it was raining and Lin appeared, calling him. He said he knew where his friend was because whenever he got kicked out of somewhere, he hid there, asking how many times his father had beaten him. While Corbin asked, "Did you come just to provoke me?" Lin questioned, "How could I do that?" However, even if they were running away, they couldn't just hide under an old bridge. And if they were going to flee, they should do it with style. Corbin asked, "Where did you learn those cliche lines?" Lin extended his hand and called Corbin, "If we're going to run away, it should be with a good friend to make it stylish." Corbin replied, "I'd only go along so you'd stop running away from these things." Lin thanked him. In the present, the young man grabbed the blonde by the neck, asking, "What were you thinking?" He shouted, "We should run," while holding on to my friend. Corbin complained, "This escape isn't stylish at all." At a distance, Lin said, "The nest seemed to have spread to the 4th floor. We need to go back for the seeds." Corbin grumbled, "We should be fleeing in style." Lin responded, "Why are you saying that in a situation like this?" The blonde asked, "Wasn't it you who said that?" Lin answered, "I never did." The two argued, with Corbin thinking Lin was pretending, while the young man denied it. Their argument was interrupted when an impact shattered the wall. A creature's hand pierced through the structure. Lin dodged, thinking it's already too late. Accord was shocked by the creature breaking through the wall. Holding Lin's head, which was close to being crushed, the blonde prepared his Molotov with a bottle. Catching the creature's attention, he threw the Molotov, shouting for the creature to release his brother. The monster tried to defend against the fire with its hand. It threw Lin away while attempting to put out the flames. The young man crashed into the blood nest. He noticed the veins were sticking to him as he was being absorbed by the blood nest trying to escape. His face became covered in veins and even his hand was being consumed. Lin cursed the situation, thinking that everything would end like this. He opened his eyes with his smaller hand. Wondering what was happening, Lin tried to understand where he was, but something strange caught his attention when looking at the roots. He saw a white-armored humanoid figure trapped. Lin questioned whether it was still alive. Suddenly, the creature opened its eyes, looking in the young man's direction, startling him. The environment shifted and Lin touched his foot to the ground, wanting to know what was happening and where he was now. His vision showed his childhood self holding Corbin's hand. That was the nosy blonde from Aberdeen, he said, questioning who he was talking to, then noticing that it was him. Lin wonders if they were really friends and if this was his memory, but his childhood version shouts that it wasn't because he wasn't the blonde one. He was Kurt Copenhagen's friend, not Lin's, calling him a thief. Lin opens his eyes, almost entirely consumed by the veins. Kurt pulls his hand, saying that dying like this would be pathetic. He manages to pull Mo out of the veins and asks if he's okay. The young man reflects that he almost became food for a blood nest, wondering when it just happened. However, he quickly decides to let it go, as this was no time to think about it. He wants to know what they're going to do about that giant, as it doesn't seem afraid of fire. Kurt grabs another Molotov and says that the guy is pretty tough, so he'll offer him another drink. Lane interrupts him, telling him not to rush. The fat of the white armored ones burns quickly at high temperatures, but the monster absorbed heat and had high regeneration. Kirk realizes that Lin has analyzed everything calmly, something rare. Kirk throws the Molotov with the intention of burning it until it can't regenerate. Lin asked if he didn't hear him, because this time the monster doesn't even bother defending against the burst of fire. Lin decides to use the black form as he can't leave that thing there. But nothing happens despite his attempt. He remembers what the doctor said, that he doesn't have enough energy now to use the black form, meaning he can't fight this thing. However, Lin is suddenly struck by a thought. From the beginning, it seems somewhat familiar. The monster absorbing Keat and the doctor mentioning that his high stake did the same, so he gets an idea. At that moment, the creature slams the ground, sending the monster flying. In his past life, the fortress had been attacked again. In front of a cross, they hoped for a spirit to find peace. Linmo notices they had been losing people for a month. They had already changed locations countless times to avoid the white armored ones, but they always found them. No matter how much they tried to escape, they still had to keep running. He tells old Joe that he's had enough, surprising the old man. After all, Linmo didn't want to run anymore. Back in the fight, he realizes he had been right. He could absorb energy from the environment, and so heat from the flames was also absorbed and converted into energy. Kurt questions, why does Lin have horns? Now, as the young man transforms. His high chef form starts to take shape, and his fist turns completely black. He lands a full-force punch on the giant monster. Kurt shields himself from the wind, wanting to know what's happening. With a single punch, his friend sent the monster flying. Lin calls Corbin and tells him to listen. Whatever you thought you knew about me before, it has nothing to do with now. I'm no longer the same. Corbin is surprised. You look amazing in that outfit, he says. Where did you get it? The blonde had already come to terms with the fact that he couldn't call his friend a monster, but Lin denies it. Soon, Lin changes the subject. That big guy is going to be tough to deal with. How many Molotovs do you still have? Kurt says, I'll check, opening his guitar case. He shows that there are still plenty left. However, the monster regains consciousness from the punch and stands, facing the two of them. Corbin asks, what are we going to do? Are we running? Lin wonders if he should flee, but he has visions of his past. The young man becomes more determined. I won't run, he decides. Running away would make things boring. Corbin looks at his friend, thinking that he has really changed, calling him by the nickname Little Black. Lin reflects that the monster wouldn't be so easily defeated. Even though it had regenerative abilities, it was still very slow. Stepping on the monster's head, the young man prepares his fist to punch, causing multiple holes in the creature's body. Lin jumps back to retreat for a second, saying, now it's Kurt's turn. He throws all the Molotovs that were in the guitar case, causing a massive explosion against the monster. The creature's fat was flammable, so as long as the wound was deep enough, the fire would burn the fat, but it wouldn't take long for it to regenerate. Thus, Lin brings his hands together to attack while it burns. He would absorb the heat from the burned fat of the white armor and use the flesh and blood of his enemy for his own benefit. His monstrous form grows wings on his back, and his energy emanates more powerfully. He stomps on the ground with force, advancing rapidly, destroying everything in his path with an explosion of energy. Lin uses his foot to stop the impact, pointing his finger at the creature. Then, getting close to it, he places his finger on its nose. The kinetic energy causes the entire structure of the creature to be destroyed with a mere touch. Corbin watches from afar and asks, was that a sound barrier? Lin reflects, as long as the entire body is destroyed, even the strongest regenerative ability is useless. However, he only managed thanks to Kurt. And although Kurt seems suspicious, he was truly helpful. Lin helps his friend up and asks, are you okay? He thinks to himself that Kurt looked sloppy, but was an idiot. Kurt then questions, why are you being so polite? Are we going downstairs to do that again? Lin thinks, what an idiot. Corbin yells when they enter the apartment. In room 409, he says, I finally understand. We're here to get seeds in the nutrient solution. He asks, when did you learn about agriculture? And how did you get all these things? Also, when did you get your powers? Lin mentally complains, even after being reborn, I still find idiots. On Lin's necklace, a voice is heard trying to communicate. The young man is surprised while Corbin asks, where did you get such a cool necklace? Bo tells him to shut up and places his fingers on his nose. Corbin yells, you're hurting me. I'm bleeding. Gas, what are the two of you doing? Lin asks, is the necklace for communication? He then explains, I only managed to reach the room. The doctor announces that she has good news. She says they found some old things in the warehouse, like this old radio station. They also found gardening supplies, which the housewife probably used for planting flowers. Lin asks, is that the good news? The doctor continues, mentioning she has a personal request. At the doctor's house, Lin reflects, unable to believe he had returned to this place. Corbin comments, even that trashy building had a lab. His friend says it was a clinic, but you're right. As they search for the capsule the doctor wants, they see a giant flask. Lin asks, what is this for? It seemed real, and what Kurt said might be true. The doctor might not actually be a doctor. He sees a biohazard warning and wonders if the doctor was studying the white armor. Wanting to know who the hell the doctor really was, Corbin turns on the computer. Lin asks, what are you doing? He hits his friend on the head. Don't mess with other people's computers. What if you delete the doctor's important information? Kurt says, I'm not an idiot. Lin has a sudden realization. He thinks about the information, tells Kurt to leave, and calls him a lackey. That enrages his friend. Lin tells him to go and gather useful supplies, but Corbin says, don't kick my guitar. He sits at the computer, hoping to find something important. Lin finally finds information on the computer. She sees a photo of her younger self and notes how shy she looked. She also spots the IV hanging around her neck. The young man realizes the doctor was hiding things from him. The base door opens. Joe greets Lin, asking, how did it go? Corbin responds, everything went well, while Joe listens to their conversation, distant and watching. Lin explains that she managed to collect some seeds that were in the room, given the limited number of accessible floors. Unfortunately, she didn't find anything edible. Joe says, it's not your fault. It's Laos for stealing the supplies. He then asks for help planting, but Lin refuses, pointing out that old Joe is injured. Joe offers to help, explaining she knows a bit about the body and biochemistry, which could be useful. Don't you think so? He asks. The young man agrees but looks suspiciously at the doctor. Kurt interrupts, saying, I'll help too. But upon seeing their looks, he changes his mind. Lin tells him, Go to the kids' table with Maggie. You're not helping. Separated from the others, Joe asked about what she had requested earlier. Lin shows the flask and asks, Is this what you were referring to? But when the woman reaches for it, Joe steps back and tells her to wait. He wants to know if she isn't going to explain anything before taking it, because he needs to find out who the hell she really is. With a smile on her face, Joe asks, You still haven't figured it out? Lin notices the expression on her face and wonders if the doctor did it on purpose. Joe remains silent, keeping her smile. The young man wonders if the capsule was just bait to lure him to her house, wanting to know what the former biochemical department agent Joe Shuya was planning. Joe grabs the flask and says, You got half of it right. It's not bait, but the key to humanity's survival. She asks, Do you remember when you became Haishan? You look similar to the monsters. I believe there's a connection between you and the creatures. The organ reinforces this theory. Even in that state, it was still absorbing Keat, much like what happened to Lin. The young man asks, What does this have to do with the key to survival, and why reveal your identity? Joe tells her test subject, Don't worry. Because whether for food or for storing energy to face the mother outside, they needed to solve the planting problem quickly. And if she isn't mistaken, when he created the hydroponic tank, he was thinking about using the red limit state to accelerate plant growth. In other words, the key to everything was Lin entering the red limit. But he didn't have enough energy to fight, let alone reach that state. Even if he could absorb heat from the surroundings, he still wouldn't be able to because his storage organs weren't efficient enough yet to allow it. So if she could add this organ, they could have a more efficient absorption system. That would enable Lin Mo to enter the red limit. Lin stops, intending to think for a moment, but Ji presses the flask against his abdomen. Summarizing that to survive, he needs to insert that into himself. The young man asks, Won't there be any rejection reaction? But black veins begin to spread over the flask. Joe asks, What is that? Then the veins form a face, followed by an immense force. Lin Mo doesn't know what is happening. He wonders if the Black Fury wants a piece of the white armor's flesh. The flask shatters on the ground, and Ji analyzes that the young man's body couldn't wait any longer. Thus, he enters the red limit state, collapsing to the ground as a creature emerges from his back. The doctor wonders if his power source came from a parasite. Wanting to know how he could fit such a massive entity inside his body, Lin simply smiles in the red limit state. It was time to plant. He says, The seedlings mature naturally and the shells were sterilized, free of greenage with only a few things missing. But he hears a noise from the top of the shelf. Maddie touches a plant and asks, What is this? It's so small. Lin responds, It's a lettuce seedling. The little girl asks about seedlings. So the young man explains, It's a baby lettuce, just like little Maggie. The girl disagrees, saying that's not true. I'm taller. Then she asks, What even is lettuce? Dorothy appears and says, It's the green vegetable in your favorite burger. Maggie asks, Can you take me to eat a burger when Dad comes back? Dorothy tries to talk about her father, but Kurt comes up behind Lin and bluntly tells her, Your father is gone. This leaves the young man speechless, but he quickly interrupts Dorothy's train of thought and turns to Corbin asking, Did you bring the wheat seeds to make bread? Corbin responds, I did. And Lin follows up, asking about tomato and cucumber seeds to make a burger. Then they ask little Maggie if she would like a burger, because they would eat as soon as the little lettuce became big. Maggie asks, How long would that take? Lin explains, If we were in ancient Greece, I'd be the god of agriculture. With me, plants would grow super fast. Maggie shouts, This is great. Dorothy thanks the guys and Lin introduces himself. I'm the guy from apartment 409. The woman says we're trapped in this situation, and if we could at least make plants grow faster, we wouldn't suffer from the cold or hunger. Kurt says, My friend is super talented. He wasn't joking. But Lin interrupts him before he can mention his powers, dragging him away. Don't say anything, Lin says. The fewer people who know, the better. Kurt asks, Why? Lin tells him not to ask, remembering Ciel mentioning that she worked on a fire in the field project during her time in the Secret Service. The security level of the program was high and the departments involved were confidential, even among themselves. But she managed to obtain specific information, a project to infiltrate agents among civilians using drugs, brainwashing and hypnosis, creating human monitors while the NSB protected the country. She didn't know if the NSB was paralyzed or not, or if there were NSB monitors among them. But if they found out about him, nothing good would happen. The fewer people who knew, the better. Lin agreed, saying he had a solution while hitting Kurt on the head. Corpin walked away with Dorothy, saying she didn't need to worry since Lin was the god of agriculture. The young man looked around, searching for someone, but then he noticed he was alone. He pointed his arm at the plants, deciding to focus intensely with his eyes closed. He activated the red limit, but he was being filmed by a camera and was being broadcast. A satellite beeped. Communication asked if it had been restored, restarting the system and connecting the satellite to search for whatever they could find in the sky. People asked what was happening because the area was frozen. They would need to gather ground information to locate terrestrial equipment, activating the only 3 drones available. However, since it was cold, the batteries wouldn't last long. They needed to collect as much information as possible before losing them. An employee asked what his superior was looking for, and he responds that he was searching for anything useful. She tells the boys to stay low because, with luck, they might find a sign of survivors or a rescue team. One of them responds that there was nothing interesting on his side. Noticing the veins on the building, she tells them to wait. As he gets closer, the veins take over the transmission, but the drone is immediately destroyed. The mother raises her bleeding hand, and the drones question what that was, starting to record. The creature begins pulling the veins from around it. A limb emerges from within the structure. The entire building shakes, including Lin's room. He wonders if it was an earthquake. He approaches Zhu and asks what is happening, but the doctor tells them to look outside. It seemed like they were running out of time as a giant-eyed creature appears, staring through the window. Jiao explains that this was what the mother had given birth to the child. The being simply asks, "Where is it?" unintentionally activating Lin's ability. It wants to know where its head is, extending its arm to use its ability. Kurt approaches the two and asks, "What is going on?" The energy in the creature's hands starts generating lightning. Then Lin shouts for everyone to get down. The monster blows up a large part of the building with its ability. Lin closes his eyes, trying to shield himself from the power. He opens them again to look to the side. He holds Xiao, thinking that was close, and asks if the doctor is okay. She says yes and asks about the test subjects, since they were very close. She notices his heart is beating fast. Lin suddenly pulls away, saying it's good she's okay. But it's not time to relax. The creature is staring directly at them. Lin wonders why the fragments are suspended in the air. He questions if it's electricity or magnetism. But soon the child uses its ability again, firing the electrified stones forward, causing another explosion in the building area. Dorothy dodges while holding Maggie. Kurt asks, "What the hell is going on?" Thinking the whole situation sucks, he shouts, "Lin, are you okay?" But he finds only the completely destroyed structure. He curses under his breath, then hears a voice from below. "Don't be scared," the voice says. It's the doctor stuck on a pillar, asking for a hand. Kurt helps her up and asks where Lin is. The doctor tries to explain, but her words are corrupted by the creature's attack. Dorothy screams for everyone to run. Corbin asks, "What the hell was that thing?" But the creature is suddenly slashed by a red energy. Jiao identifies the color of the attack, and the creature falls backward, crashing into a building. Lin stands in front of it, now in his white armor mode, but with red stripes instead of blue. A camera records the wreckage. The person watching asks, "Is this the monster the rescue team mentioned? The one lifting stones with its power and breaking the drone, the last one remaining?" The people watching ask what they should do now. Pops explains that it hasn't been long since communications were reestablished, so it will take a while for the bunker to make contact. A woman says the bunker just needed to wait because those in the field had a lot to think about. Her colleague asks why he doesn't prepare for exploration, since they might find survivors. Pops refuses. The situation outside is uncertain, and it's better to wait and see what might happen. Another explosion erupts at the site of the battle. Lin emerges from the smoke, his body outlined by different armor, creating more energy horns. He reflects, this is beyond the limit, and it seemed like something else like rekindled embers, so he clenched his fist. The child threw more stones toward the young man, but he took a deep breath. His monstrous body sat on the ground, advancing quickly before rising, heading straight for the stones that were thrown at him. Lin leaped over each stone, setting them back. The creature kept trying to control them, while the young man thought that the embers didn't burn intensely. Instead, they burned silently like eternal sparks. The monster raised its hand and began gathering several stones to launch at the boy, as if forming the structure of a meteor. It fired its ability at Lin. The attack approached, and the young man reflected that the sparks were not dying out. He channeled energy into his fist to continue his thought. All of this was like the prelude to a wildfire on a plane. Lin struck the meteor with his fist, causing a shockwave that spread across the entire block. A building exploded from the flying stone fragments, striking all the houses around and even hitting the creature itself. Dorothy questioned, "What was that red thing?" Kurt was about to explain, but Jay told him to keep it a secret. Joe asked, "Was it an angel?" Surprising the three of them, he defeated the creature and seemed like an angel sent by God. However, his terrible face looked more like a demon. Lin falls to the ground, wings forming at his waist. He reflects that this time he had gone too far, causing immense destruction to the building. The parasite asks, wasn't it fine since you were the only one who can handle this kind of power? Lin asks, are you willing to leave? He calls her an insect. The parasite is surprised and asks, do you have something to tell me? The young man replies, I have many things to say. She raises her arms and says, thanks to the crazy doctor who fed me the core, I'm in a good mood. So if you want to ask something, do it now. Lin asks, what exactly is the white armor? He was about to ask another question, but the parasite places her finger on his mouth. We'll do this little by little, she says. She explains, white armor would be more accurately described as an empty shell, like a body without a soul, entirely bound by the obsession of its past life. Just like you were bound, or rather Mo, who lost his life in another timeline. Since time is not continuous for me, Link died, and she would leave that timeline and move to another one. In this process, the soul and consciousness would go with her, leaving Lin's body behind. The version of him that lost his soul would turn into an empty shell, and perhaps his shell was fighting somewhere out there. Lin reflects that all the places where conflicts arose in his memory now made sense. The parasite tells him he understood quickly. The young man realizes that, technically, he had not been reincarnating, but rather traveling through time. The child begins to shed its skin because there was a core inside it, and a flame appears on its head. Lin realizes that each white armor corresponded to supernatural beings who had traveled through time. Shalel asks Barbara, what are we looking for? The woman replies, if the guy from the field who turned into a monster brought a delivery, then we need to see what it was. Her subordinate objects saying, it's the highest level of evidence. Our boss will be angry. But soon they realize that the package is ahead. The child calls for its head, asking where it might be, and creates a blast of energy thanks to the fire on its head. Lin defends himself from the energy using his arm. What's going on? Can that creature not die? The parasite replies, it's a special child. You should ask it. Lin wonders, why are you still talking so much? This doesn't usually happen. The parasite responds, we're all her. Time is not linear, but you're an idiot. Lin asks, is this really the time to discuss that? Am I acting like a child because of it? The child charges forward with an attack. Lin notices its speed is impressive, but the monster prepares another electromagnetic blast in its hand. It completely surprises the boy in his current form. He dodges, saying, I was almost caught. That creature is fast. But he thinks to himself, compared to my new form, it's nothing. The child places its hand on the ground, picking up stones. It throws them toward Lin. Lin wonders, why am I floating? Is it some kind of gravity effect? Then the creature pulls him closer, grabbing him by the neck. Lin notices the monster is absorbing his heat. This is bad, he thinks, wondering if they share the same origin. The parasite appears again, saying, it's difficult for us to drain each other completely. Lin groans, you again. Bluish arms emerge from his back. She pushed the creature's hand aside and sent it flying. Another suit of armor appeared behind Lin, its face fierce, yet its form distinctly feminine. The parasite said, given your current state, I'll have to handle this myself. The boy looked at her in surprise, and the parasite continued, you think I would just stay inside you watching? Don't be surprised. With the second core, I can create another body. The child rushed toward them both, but the parasite warned, that will disrupt the energy balance. She struck at the creature, saying, I have no time to waste. The creature used its ability through its foot. It's that gravity trick again, Lin cautioned. Don't worry, the parasite told him, if we can't escape gravity, we'll rise above it. She touched Lin's chest, releasing a surge of energy that shattered the ground around them. Gravity pulled the parasite downward as the creature lunged forward. A sword appeared in the parasite's hand and flames burst around the opponent. The child dodged, only grazed on the shoulder, revealing a small section of armor missing. Far away, someone watched the scene through binoculars and says they have found 13. Their partner asks, was she around here? The woman replies, it wasn't too far, but the current situation isn't suitable for recycling. I found an interesting guy. The parasite says, this is my true power. It's a waste to fight barehanded. Then Lin wonders, is there another function? The creature was repairing its arm, but she suddenly creates a scythe since she could do the same. The man removes his hat and says, I didn't expect 13, the Holy Mother, to be forced into this state. I plan to use the chaos of the revelation to steal 13's abilities and then her head to find the agency. But I hadn't expected this to happen. Arena wants to intervene, but he says that would expose our movements and the logistics agency wouldn't stop for a revelation. The girl agrees with Father Cross and says it's because we were chosen by the Holy Spirit. Another woman embraces Arena from behind and tells the priest, don't be so serious, pressing her chest against the girl's back. She says little Ina had been a member of the prophetic association since childhood, so taking care of one requires patience. and Arena asks, "Where are you touching?" The priest warns that Jingu was late. The woman says that dealing with the insects following them was difficult. The priest thanks her for being well. Since everyone was there, they should watch the distance stage because the plan was about to be uncovered. The child launches an attack using its scythe. Lin wonders if it was a shockwave that attracted, but the parasite simply charges forward, calling him. He reflects that moments ago, she used the attraction force to cause a massive explosion and now was trying the same thing. Then he tells the parasite to wait because it's a trick. The parasite is surprised upon getting close, being caught by a burst of attacks, which she blocks with the sword. The repulsion force of the scythe sends the parasite flying far. Then the creature charges from the ground, aiming for a downward strike at the parasite's head. She is startled by the attempt, but is struck by the blow. Her scythe is embedded in the ground, but there was nothing there. Looking forward in search of the two, Lin holds the parasite in his arms and says, "As I mentioned before, you were fast, but compared to me, the child was at least 500 cosmic velocities behind." The parasite gets up and says this was the child's ability, not an ordinary shell, while Lin responds, "I felt it. She was stronger than the other white armors." Father Cross explains that a body is supposed to be empty, but it is filled with the soul, and it was not in harmony. That's what he thought when he first saw 13, since she was both a divine child and an empty shell at the same time. Her soul and flesh were disconnected, but she was more superhuman than white armor, though still a bit both. Zhao reflects that she thought it was just her imagination, but this situation, she asked her test subject not to disappoint her. Lei tries to calm himself and not get anxious. She had released the attraction force before, and her body had returned to white both times. However, the bronze parts could use repulsion force. He then realizes the creature's ability. Lin asks, "Didn't the parasite tell you to incinerate her a moment ago? Should we increase the firepower?" The parasite repeats that phrase, but with a smile, she agrees. "I understand," she says, and asks Lin to extend his hand. The young man is surprised by the parasite's action. She places his hand between her breasts, and Lin questions, "What are you trying to do?" A rupture forms in her body, shaping the hilt of a weapon for Lin. The child charges again with her sight, but the sword emerges from the parasite's chest before the child's attack can reach them. Lin fully draws the large sword and blocks the scythe, surprising a child with the sheer power. The impact creates an explosion that repels her. The monster crashes to the ground with its arms closed. While Lin rests the sword on his shoulder, walking slowly toward the child, the parasite advances from behind her. The left hand could release the repulsion force, so she should be attacked from the left. This forces her to use the repulsion force to defend herself. The sight begins to deform as Lin thinks about controlling his opponent's attack path. This was the moment when his best opportunity to strike had arrived. He advances with his wings. Therefore, he would counterattack from the monster's right, forcing her to use the attraction force to pull him closer. Attraction force could only be used for defense, so she could only change the path of Lin's attack. In this case, that was exactly what the young man wanted. It would prove that her body was like a magnet following magnetic flows. These flows became Lin's acceleration zones. By adding the kinetic energy from his rapid speed, that was the exact moment to give it all. Lin causes an explosion in the area with his attack. He takes a deep breath after landing the blow, while the child looks upward. Lin had managed to pierce the creature with the sword. The parasite follows up with an overhead strike, aiming to deliver the finishing blow and end the battle. Cross prays for God to protect his chosen child, using his golden pilgrimage attack. Lights carry Arena onto the battlefield. Jingu questions whether she was sent correctly since it might cause some discomfort, but the girl says she's fine and summons the holy coffin. The parasite was about to strike from above when Arena draws her sword. "It's interesting," she says, "because it's like looking in a mirror." Arena had a protective covering over her eye, shielding her. She finally unsheathes her sword, slashing at the parasite. Lin asks, "Who is this girl?" as she approaches. "I thought she was a superhuman." 13 deconstructs in front of them both. Arena grabs its core with her hand. As the parasite tries to intervene, Jinyu warns of a sneak attack. The girl flips her sword around, blocking the parasite's strike. She hurls the monster far away. Lin catches her by the waist. Arena, holding the core in her hand, says 13 is safe, and she wants to return quickly, but Cross asks for a moment. The priest says he could see her from there and would mark her as a direct target. She should jump when the time came because he didn't want to bring the ground beneath her down as well. Lin wonders what Aina is trying to do as the girl crouches and says it's troublesome. The young man wants to know why a human is trying to save a white armor, but Arena just jumps off the ground. Cross instructs Jinyu to capture her properly. Then the woman appears, holding Arena in her arms and welcoming her. The girl is surprised to be received by Jinyu. She tells Arena not to worry about 13, but the girl curses Cross for doing it on purpose. The priest asks, "Did you also want to crash into the ground when you were taken there?" His ability had limits. Arena, irritated, throws 13's core at Cross. He reflects that it might take a little longer to incubate a new body, while Jinyu annoys Aina. Cross asks 13 to be a good girl and sleep through the process. The leader of the Prophetic Association had told them before to move carefully, and he couldn't challenge a leader. However, he really wanted to talk to the other two who had defeated him. While Lin says they escaped, the battlefield was completely destroyed. Joe comments, there was too much smoke. I couldn't see the situation. Joe says it seemed to be over, and Corbin wanted to know about the monster. The doctor warns they seem to be safe, but Maggie wanted to know about Lin Mo. The officer calls for Lin while trying to see through the smoke. Wondering, had Lin gotten out of there? The young man appears and asks, why is everyone looking down? I had to get up from the 3rd floor today. In the medical room moments later, Joe questions, did Lin hit his head? It seems like a blessing from God. The young man agrees, and G tells him, move your hand. I'm going to take a look. Lin says, I'm fine, and whispers to the girl, it's not necessary. Zhao responds, you wouldn't lose anything by letting me check. Then whispers back, we should act properly. Joe says everyone being okay could be considered pure luck. But due to the shockwaves, the pipes broke outside and the heating system probably wouldn't work anymore. So, after a big round, they were back to square one. But Lin tells him, don't be pessimistic. The situation isn't as bad as you think. When he went up the stairs, he discovered that the blood nest had disappeared, meaning they could go down to check the lower floors. But their group was the only one alive in the building. It wasn't time to grieve yet, though. They needed to find a former resident's supplies to block the wind and rain. So he tells Joe not to worry too much. He would let everyone know to relocate. Joe trembles, holding his phone in hand. The agency wasted no time, he says. Outside, someone knocks on a truck. The door is open, and the soldier greets Captain Pops, Surgeon Rodas, and Corporal Lai. I'm Secret Agent Zan White, he says. I'm here to deliver the bunker's orders to capture the superhuman Lin Mo. Corgan asks, is that what Lin meant by dirty business? Maggie wonders, does this mean we're safe now? Joe shakes his head. We're not completely safe. The situation outside is bad. The heater's broken. Lin says, we have to use this opportunity to move the base. It's the best decision. We still have the building and the lower floors are usable. The central heating system is still working. So comments, it's not enough. We're not just fighting the cold. We need defensive structures. And Lin says she was right and that he would do his best, asking if Joe still had some personal defense equipment in the security department. The officer says he thinks so, not just personal defense equipment, because before the disaster, Brooklyn's public security had upgraded its gear. Now they had some weapons and vests, so if they used everything, they might be able to take care of the entire building. Though he wasn't sure if it would be effective against monsters. Corgan tries to say that he has an idea. He discovered that if he played a certain tone, the monsters couldn't move. That should be the power of music. Lane says that's ridiculous, and Joe agrees, making Corbin angry. The young man tells everyone that he and Kurt would go down first to check the situation, while Corbin complains, asking them to hear his explanation. Lynn orders him to stop wasting time, and Corbin asks for a moment. As they are being recorded, Mo says they should just inspect the lower floors, but Kurt wants to put his guitar back in its case. In an apartment, Corbin comments that he hadn't noticed before, but Lynn was living really well since he'd been in a small town in Seattle. He asked if his friend is doing something illegal. While a young man asked if that's all, he reflects that given his current situation, even the ordinary seemed extravagant. A sudden freeze in those white armors appeared so abruptly that even living a normal life felt extravagant. Even this rare moment of serenity, Lynn wondered how long it would last. After all, everyone was tired and needed time to rest. Kyo looks at a card while taking a bath, realizing she needed to sort out her feelings. Maggie gazes at a photo of her father with Dorothy, reminding herself that no matter how hard it was, there was no reason to give up. Even with their bodies and minds covered in wounds, they needed to survive without scruples. So for Lynn, there were some things that needed to be explained clearly. He calls Corbin, and his friend asks, "What is it?" Mo says that what he was about to tell Kurt might be unbelievable. His friend then asks, "Why are you suddenly saying things like that?" But Lynn says, whether you accept it or not, what I'm saying is the truth. Kurt asks, "Did your brain disappear after fighting the monsters?" But Lynn questions, wouldn't the Lynn Mo, who was my friend, recognize me? Even you, a good friend of years, have become supervillain. Kurt should have doubts about that. The young man explains, the person standing in front of you is someone who should not be alive. I'm Lin Mo from another timeline. I've taken over the body of your friend, and the real owner of this body is no longer here. Surprising Kurt with the exaggerated explanation, Lin continues, I know it's difficult to accept. Not believing me is part of what I expected, but I'm telling you because I'm a good friend of the original owner of this body, and after a few days it'll only get harder. I don't want to put you in trouble by hiding the truth. Corbin comments, so basically you're a Lin Mo who never had a bad friend during childhood. Is that right? Lin is taken aback by the young man's response, but Kurt presses on, saying, we should get to know each other again. I'm Kurt Corbin, a good friend of Lin Mo. The young man just laughs at the introduction. Then Kurt places a cigarette in his mouth, asking, so about everything you just said, in the end, you're still Lin Mo, right? And if this Lin Mo lost his life and crossed into someone else's body, you probably think it sounds cool saying things like that. Lin grabs his friend's hand and replies, I'm Lin Mo. But he tells Kurt not to smoke in his room, and Kurt apologizes. Outside the building, a car drives through the snow. Rhodes calls Pops an old man, asking why they should join the field workers if they were just a rescue team. The man stays silent for a second and says he knew that Agent White was being pressured by time, but asked if they didn't need to exchange some information first. White replies that there was no time to waste because he knew what they were going to ask, and as a rescue team, they must have noticed that very little information had been provided beforehand. There was a group of humans trying to capture the target before them. It would take too long to explain everything. Still, I'll give the main points. White continues. Right after the freezing began, the National Intelligence Bureau activated the National Crisis Management Protocol. At that time, communications were cut off and the execution of the protocol became chaotic. Pop says that during that same period, their team received no orders and was left on standby. But he had mentioned before that the communication failure was not a technical issue. White explains that no matter how strong the monsters were, they couldn't have destroyed the backup communication plan as well. That was human action, the commander says. Thinking about it, the disaster and everything that happened was too convenient. White agrees. Fortunately, communications were restored, he adds. However, the intelligence department and the biosafety department suspected that this series of events had been orchestrated by a strange secret organization. Rhodes appears and speaks up. There were no records of them in the CIA, he says. Even the National Intelligence Group couldn't detect them. Whether a person was alive or not, they should have respirators. Save that story for children, she responds. I had been in the intelligence department as well, and a ghost organization should have left some kind of trace. White interjects. Espers would be the correct term, not ghosts. Rhodes asks, wasn't that the code for the operations target? White explains, if I hadn't gone through this myself, I would also think it was ridiculous, but the result was obvious. He then removes a pendant from his neck and shows it to the soldiers. Pops and Rhodes are surprised, offering their condolences. White continues, the Esper organization was as secret as a ghost, but we knew they were the enemy. Pops looks at him thoughtfully and deduces. The higher-ups believe the target was another Esper. Lee drives the car and assumes that the Esper organization was trying to recruit others, but asks for forgiveness if he was wrong. White explains that his clearance level wasn't high enough to know the details of the matter. And perhaps Corporal Lee was right because, as far as he understood it, Subject Zero was the only detected Esper. Given their current situation, he was the only option for understanding. Hence, the bunker had targeted him. The car stops suddenly. Pops asks, what happened? Lee calls his chief, saying there are 2 survivors standing in front of the truck. The captain looks through the car's rearview mirror and says, it's strange, but I'll step out first to check. He gets out in front of the 2 survivors and asks, are you okay? Introducing himself as an agent of the National Intelligence Bureau, offering to help them. Both survivors thank him, asking for help to get out because Brooklyn had turned into hell. While White listens to the conversation holding his weapon, Pops explains that it's a bit complicated. Although they are a combat team, they have an urgent mission now. But he adds, I can't leave them behind. It's my duty surprising the 2 survivors. He has a commitment to get to, and informs the 2 civilians that there are some supplies in the car and that he can share them. Both ask about the supplies with a dark expression. Then the girl pulls out a knife, while Pop says, I know times are tough, but we should calm down. He tries to reach for his gun. However, the survivors hold him back to prevent it. The girl suddenly tries to attack with a knife, but is stopped by precision shots to the chest. White was aiming at them from a distance, landing a shot to the other man's head. Someone on top of a building has a Molotov, but White had already spotted them from afar. The person lights the Molotov. As the soldier aims his rifle at them and cocks it with his sights focused on the Molotov, he fires again with his sniper, exploding the bomb before it can hit them. Pops manages to land a kick on one of the survivors, hitting the other with an elbow strike to the chest, while White finishes them off with a headshot. Pops pulls his pistol and shoots the woman in the chest, finishing her with a shot to the head. White notices one of the survivors coming at him with an axe. He turns to grab the gun at his waist, pulling the trigger and firing at the survivor with ease. He falls with multiple shots to his arms and legs. While White finishes him with a shot to the head, Pops shouts that he is safe, and the soldier does the same. Then he gets back in the car, and Rhodes asks him something. Pops wants to know what's wrong, but Rhodes questions whether they weren't survivors, saying that people are driven to madness and hoping that Subject Zero wasn't. Corbin warns his friend that he had placed it there, but Lynn is drawing along with Joe, who comments that the place could be used as a greenhouse. Kurt says that people who don't know any better would think they're doing zero shopping. To summarize the group's plan, the east side of the third floor would be converted into a plant greenhouse, while the west side would be suitable for living. Since the sixth floor was severely damaged and the others were affected, it was safer for everyone to stay on the third. As for the first and second floors, they would be set with traps, and the security room would serve as a forward outpost or command center. But Lynn felt like something was missing. Joe comments that he could handle it with one hand when he was younger, and Corbin tells him he's bragging. The officer asks if they're going to the garage to try it out. Then Kurt accepts the old man's challenge. Lynn thinks this is really childish, but Joe warns him through the communicator that he should come to her. The young man asks, "What is it?" The doctor replies, "You'll know when you get here." So the young man goes to her and asks, "What do you need?" Jay says, "In the last battle, you mentioned seeing your own kind." The young man agrees, "Yes, and you were the one who stole the white armor's core." Zhao says, "I have something to tell you." She plays a message from someone, telling the survivors not to blame themselves amid the frost. Lynn asks, "Why are you making me listen to this?" The doctor tells him, "Keep listening." The audio continues, "In the past, God sent the flood to wash away the sins of the world. This place had always been brainwashed by the government, which monitored everything. Public and private debts were contracts that forced them to sin. But God was merciful to people, so the pure souls would be blessed." Then Jingbo finds a white armor. She touches its chest, making her hand intangible. She pulls out a rocket launcher from inside and aims it at the monster. She fires, obliterating the creature in just a second. It ceases to exist instantly. The message ends. The lost lambs will find hope in the apocalypse. Led by the holy children, this was judgment upon the evil government. Cross thought as he listened to the message. Surprised by the corporal lie, he touched the girl's hand with his power. The message continued, warning that they should join them. The Holy Son would protect them and absorb their sins. The priest would lead them to his kingdom. Jiao asked, "Did you have any idea about what you just heard?" Lei replied, "I just thought it was an anti-government cult. The blessing and the Holy Son they mentioned, those seem to be espers." Jiao nodded. "If that's the case, it's possible. But things have gotten very serious. For a long time, there has been a human legend. Whether it was the Freemasons or the Illuminati, they all carried weight. But now the Society of Prophets, a dark cult, is doing the dirty work from the outside, and the dog bit back, infecting the Pentagon. So they created the NLSB to fight against it. This story was almost forgotten. It was something that should have been forgotten. But now the prophetic society that was once eliminated has resurfaced, thanks to the ice apocalypse." Lin frowned. "Isn't what you just said classified information? I work to the biosafety department." Zhao sighed. "Unfortunately, yes." She also had a terrible friend, and she was an intelligence agent, or rather, a former agent. Rhodes suddenly sneezes. Lee asks, "Are you okay?" The girl replies, "The Society of Prophets was eradicated, not dissolved. The NLSB wasn't as incompetent as the CIA. I had a bold hunch the Society of Prophets with espers came from another universe just like Lin, a ghost." The young man is surprised. "You do all that?" he wonders. "Were you listening to everything through the pendant on your head?" Jiao exhales smoke. "It's touching," he says, "and a little sweet for two men." But Lin interrupts, yelling, "It's a bond between friends." The doctor continues, "If that's the case, maybe the Society of Prophets noticed Lin. Either way, we have an enemy to protect ourselves against." She asks, "Aren't you going to move? We should help carry your things. Don't forget the ashtray." Lin says, "I call them just for that." Lai turns off the radio. "It's not surprising the intelligence department couldn't find any records on the Society of Prophets," he says, glancing at Rode. "Is there any secret?" The woman responds, "It's more than a secret. It's related to the National Intelligence Cabinet." But the superiors had thoughts. However, a hand covers her mouth. Pops tells Sergeant Rhodes, "Don't forget she was transferred to the field department." White listens to a message. It says that although communication was restored, it was still unstable and needed to be quick. It was now confirmed that the Society of Prophets was connected to espers. Therefore, capturing Target Zero was the highest priority. To help complete the mission quickly, the superiors had decided to grant high authority as an exception. Any form of resistance at this moment was a threat to the plan to save humanity. Therefore, having maximum authority meant he could eliminate any threat as he saw fit and activate other agents at any time. Inside room 303, a burger is held by a hand. Then Maggie takes a big bite. Dorothy comments, "I didn't expect Lin to make food grow so fast. I really can praise a burger thanks to him." Lin says, "What I learned in agricultural school. If you want to thank someone, it should be science. Joe opens the fridge, surprised by a bottle. Dorothy says, I found it while organizing supplies. I heard you wanted to drink something. So, she chilled a bottle for him. Joe thanked her, pouring tequila into a glass of water, then cutting a lime in half. Joe handed the drink with salt to Mr. Lin. Lin asked the old man, what was that? Joe replied, the most authentic tequila should be paired with the most traditional way of drinking it. He offered the drink to his savior, adding, so we should sit down and enjoy the delicious food. Lin thanked him for the drink, saying, I wouldn't be reclusive. Then he ran the lime over his tongue, drank the tequila with his finger, and finished by sucking on the sour lime. Joe offered the drink to the doctor, but she explained, I smoke, so I don't drink. Meanwhile, Lin started feeling sick from the alcohol. Dorothy commented, I haven't seen Mr. Corbin. Lin replied, he's on duty. Dorothy said, I'll take his share. Lin responded, no need to trouble yourself. But the housekeeper insisted the soldiers are watching the scene from outside. White told everyone, prepare to check communications. This is the alpha test. Rose at the base said she's fine and HQ was received. Calling for Bravo and Delta. Bravo, who was Pops, confirmed receipt, and Delta, who was Lie, did the same. Thus, the soldier says he'll leave the communication to the kid. Rose informs Pops and Lie that they were experiencing interference and needed to readjust. Both ask about it, but Bravo explains that the adjustment would be done as quickly as possible. Rhodes agrees to saying she switched to the private channel. Pops asks, what was that? Why are you being mysterious? Rhodes questions whether they should use force since Target Zero didn't seem dangerous. She feels that the field agent is hiding something from them. Bravo agrees with her, believing that the higher-ups are involved given that intelligence has the sense. But, as her captain, he doesn't want anything to happen. So, even though he says that he won't stop the girl, he asks her to be careful. Rhodes calls him again, saying that the adjustment is complete and finally initiates the operation. Lin pours more drink into Joe's glass and asks, do you have a daughter? Joe explains that he had a family, but hadn't seen his daughter in about 20 years. He was frozen outside and wondered how she was doing. Joe warns that he was injured and should drink less. Then Joe apologizes to his daughter for already being. Surprising Lin, the man holds Joe's hand and calls out to his daughter Dana. Joe is surprised by the coincidence of the name, but says nothing. He then continues saying it was his fault for not protecting his daughter and her mother. Lin laughs. Joe asks, why are you laughing? Joe keeps begging his daughter to forgive her father. The young man reflects if they weren't in the middle of the iced apocalypse at that moment, they would seem like a family. But suddenly, the lights go out. Lin wonders if the generator broke, and Joe notices something is off. Joe suddenly stands up and says that time has come. Lin wonders where old Kia was going, but the man remains silent. Joe simply grabs a knife, unsheathing it while looking enraged. Inside the apartment, White comes face to face with a barrier. It's completely blocked, he says, and it seems right. Lee asks, was the informant reliable? Pop suggests they test it. The corporal manages to open the maintenance tunnel and decides they will go in. Bravo keeps moving and communicates to HQ that they have reached the 3rd floor. Rose instructs HQ to turn on the monitor. We need video, she says, and we should split up and search according to the plan. Locating the civilians and then securing the target. White says, there are only 3 of them, and we need to support the others' emergencies. There's no need for formalities at a time like this. The soldiers agree. They split up, with White heading up the stairs. Joe is masked inside the 3rd floor, ready to attack the soldiers with stealth. Lin asks, what's the situation now? Joe replies, I don't know. The young man stays silent, looking ahead. Joe looks at him and nods. Corbin suddenly appears in the apartment and calls out to them. Something big happened. Some guys with guns showed up, and they didn't look friendly. Lee appears and announces, I'm safe. Pops does the same. But Joe suddenly collapses, still masked. Pops points his gun at him, and Lee does the same. Joe remains silent as the soldiers wonder if he's a civilian. Pops announces we're with the National Rescue Team. Lai contacts HQ about encountering civilians. The captain tries to touch Joe's shoulder, saying, we're here to help. Joe questions that help, repeating the part about being the National Intelligence Bureau's rescue team. He asks, since when did we start doing such humane things? Rose recalls the mask on his face, saying, it's good that the internet works searching and finding him. The woman informs Bravo, he isn't an ordinary civilian. The man asks, what do you mean? Mashit, an NSLB agent, escaped from prison after destroying cartels in San Diego. He used traffickers' intestines as rope and was then recruited for special missions. Pops comments he's one of them. As he draws his weapon, Joe repeats the words, one of them, then unsheathes the knife from its scabbard. He slices Pop's hand, saying, you took the life of my Jade. 2 of Pop's fingers are severed by the swordsman, who charges again. You took Jonah from me, he says. Pops grabs the knife with his wounded hand. Joe asks, "How dare you say you're one of them?" Lai aims through Pops to shoot at Joe. He orders his superior to duck and fires, but the bullet merely ricochets off the mask. Joe kicks Pops away, pulling a kume from his waist. He throws it toward Lai, a knife moving rapidly, striking him fatally. White tries to call Bravo and Delta to report, but the communicator doesn't work. He wonders what is happening. Lin appears behind him and says, "Despite all this snow and wind outside, people are still invading other people's homes." White tries to draw his pistol, but as he goes to fire, the man has already disappeared. Lin tells him, "You're a noisy intruder." White introduces himself, saying, "I am an agent of the NSLB. I'm here to capture Lin Mo." The young man vanishes again, leaving only traces behind. He asks, "Are you going to arrest me?" "That's interesting. You're not concerned about the ice, just about capturing me. Is it your duty to maintain order after the collapse, or are you hiding something?" White turns again to shoot at Lin, telling him, "Don't challenge me. I will fire." Lin replies, "You better be sure you can actually hit me." With that, the man fires his sniper rifle, activating its absolute precision mode. Lin dodges the bullets using his acceleration and rushes forward, striking White's head with a single blow. The man's focus device falls to the ground. Lin notices something is off. He had clearly aimed for White's head, but White says it was close, but lucky. "My intuition has always been sharp." And Lin must be wondering why he didn't twist his head. His intuition told him the trajectory of Lin's attack. Simply put, he could even predict if Lin was going to fart just by the way he lifted his butt. Lin asks, "Who the hell are you?" White activates a similar ability and responds, "I already told you. I'm Zian White, an agent of the National Intelligence Bureau. People call me an Esper." Rhodes tries to contact Alpha, saying, "I can't see his screen." She whistles, trying to reach Diane, calling HQ and requesting reinforcements. Lee panics, shouting for reinforcements while yelling, "Pops and I have been hit." Several knives fly toward the pair, striking their backs and vests. Joe slowly approaches the fallen duo. While Lily points his weapon at him, they are surprised to see that the man is no longer in their line of sight. Then Joe suddenly appears behind them. Stones hit him out of nowhere, saving the two. Lin collides with his old friend Joe. He reflects that he was careless just as a creature invades the room. Lin looks back, wondering who he bumped into, but soon smells alcohol and realizes it was the old man Ko. The young man helps show up and asks, "Who are the two of you?" Pops asks them to listen to what they had to say about their identities. The creature stomps his foot on the ground. Lin explains that they need to deal with that guy first. Pops just reports to HQ through the radio, asking if it was an empty shell and informing them that he had made contact with one. The creature swiftly moves its pupil downward, preparing an electricity attack against Pops, but White pulls the strings and orders it to wait, stopping the creature from moving its arm. Zion explains that Lin Mo was the target. He warns Lin with just a look, while the young man grits his teeth, preparing for combat. He responds that it seemed like a tough and unavoidable fight. Then he gently places Joe on the ground and apologizes since he owed him another drink. He begins transforming into a monster. White says it was expected from Subject Zero, and seeing it with his own eyes was still shocking. But Lin asked if that meant Zan knew something. The monster lunges to capture Lin. However, he simply activates his acceleration. Seeing the attack in slow motion, Lin looks back, thinking he couldn't fight there. Clenching his energy-infused fist, he strikes the sounder carrier to divert the blow. The creature is startled by this. White wonders if that was a sound barrier, and if Lin really managed to deflect attacks using it. Lin charges toward the two, leaping from the third floor with the creature. He strikes the shield again, questioning whether it was made of energy. A dust explosion erupts as the three hit the ground. Lin rises, saying, "This is going to be complicated since the monster itself is a type of power, but the shield is the biggest problem." However, he still doesn't see himself as completely without hope. Noticing Chains, he decides he should capture the leader first, while White tells him to give up because everything he does is futile. Lin crouches and generates his energy wings and horn, thinking that speed is his advantage. He yells, "How would he know without testing it?" and launches off the ground with force, destroying everything in his wake. White dodges, asking, "Hadn't I already said so? My intuition has already foreseen the trajectory of your attack," but he is surprised when he looks to the side. Lin is running chaotically, trying to keep them from knowing where he's coming from. Lin smirks and says, "Since you can see the path of my attack, I'll create more paths to interfere with your intuition." Since speed was his advantage, and as long as he was fast enough, he could always find White's weakness. White destroyed the chains and repeated that speed was his advantage, and he was very confident. The creature looked to the side with its broken chain. Then, its forearm formed a blade, preparing to charge forward as well. White said Lin wasn't the only one here with a speed advantage. The attack wounded Limo. He wondered what was happening. As the creature rushed to attack again, Linmo noticed that despite its size, it was still fast. The monster thrust the blade from its forearm. Surprised by the boy, the creature's strike didn't hit his throat. Lin held the blade, saying, "That was too close." White told Linmo to stop resisting, pointing his weapon at Lin's head. Driving a corpse in this kind of weather is troublesome. Lin said, "Don't talk to me like that," and wondered if the higher-ups would allow him to die there. Since White was just a dog of the National Intelligence Bureau, some fragments of stone rose from the ground, surprising White as he noticed the shards which came together and formed something. Lin knocked the weapon aside, and the shard structure finished forming, making the boy run toward it. White tries to keep aiming at the monster, but Lin is already close to the sword, gripping its hilt tightly. A massive blast of destruction erupts behind White, who wonders what is happening. As soon as Lin grabs the sword, more lightning appears. His face partially turns white. Then he pulls the shard sword from the ground, spinning the hilt and revealing it's actually a spear. His armor, now in blue and white tones, prepares for combat. Lin plants the spear into the ground and says, "We should begin the second round of battle." White thinks intelligence was right. Lin had evolved steadily, and if it continued, things would only get harder. He decides he should end it quickly. He couldn't let Lin evolve more. Raising his arm, White says, "I'll fight a bit." The creature forms another blade from its forearm, launching energy slashes at Linmo. The boy watches the attacks, thinking the doctor mentioned blue meant absorption. He spins the spear defensively, blocking the attacks like a shield. But then, his spear turns reddish, changing the entire color of his armor to a deep red. White wonders what is happening. As Lin prepares to throw the spear, he hurls it at maximum speed toward the two of them, destroying everything in its path. White realizes he not only dodged the attack, but also converted it into his own energy. Noticing the spear approaching his white armor, he prepares to receive the blow. The spear strikes the barrier in front of it, gradually turning the barrier red. Lin says the strength of the field can neutralize both, since the spear was made of black shard fragments and can generate the same force field after absorbing energy. But unlike the neutralizing soap bubbles, once force fields cancel each other out, an explosion erupts in front of the creature, sending it flying behind White. The soldier wonders how this could happen, since his white armor had been knocked out by the blow. White sends the creature back into the barrier, saying it was hurt and could return to rest for a while. He wanted to know if Lin was going to continue. The boy explains, "I'm not stupid. I can't do anything about your intuition, but without a pet, you can't do anything to me either." White repeats the part about being a pet. Lin points the spear, saying they were at a standstill. White repeats it, wondering if Subject Zero had been mistaken, because he should look at himself, since he resembled the white monsters that come from the snow and ice. Still, Lin thought it was a standoff, but White didn't see it the same way. He yelled for his partner to do something. His partner started playing the guitar. Lin looked back, recognizing the sound, while a massive speaker blared. The boy asked, "What's going on?" His head was hurting. The blonde person began to sing, continuing to play their guitar. Lin noticed the parasite was resisting the music. But the song said, "Wake me up when September ends." And so the parasite began to leave his form, falling to the ground. It separated from Lin Mo, and the boy, reaching out, closed his eyes. Corbin was in front of him, holding his hand. White warned that he was late. Corbin apologized, wanting to know, "Did I miss anything exciting?" White agreed, but none of it mattered now. The mission was complete. He thanked Agent Corbin for his help. Kurt told him, "Don't mention it." 30 minutes earlier, he had accessed the computer. Sleepy, he took a nap in the surveillance room, watching a recording of the agents breaking in. Then, the surveillance room door opened. White pointed a gun at Corbin's head, frightening the young man who had been sleeping. He was now awakened by 3 men. Kurt stated, "There were no hidden herbs. I stopped that a long time ago." White started saying strange things to Corbin, making the young man repeat the words in a trance about the bad boys unit. "It's the weapons answer," White said. Corbin responded, "It's 21. Answering and adding, "I'm ready." Light question, "What's that?" Bravo explained they're field agents, also known as secret agents of the bad boys. Corbin banged his head on the keyboard, now unconscious, in front of White. Bravo questioned, "What's happening? Did Rhodes do this?" While Light didn't know, Rhodes replied, "I didn't. The facilities are old, and I can't control them remotely. It's likely a malfunction." Corbin suddenly woke up. "We need to apprehend Subject Zero Limo and rescue survivors as per the briefing," White stated. "But we need our current location." Corbin picked up his phone, asking them to wait. The power outage, Subject Zero and the survivors might have moved. "It's better to split up," Corbin suggested. "And when apprehending Subject Zero, our firepower isn't enough to capture him. But I have a way. I just need something first." Maggie asked, "What's going on? And why did Mr. Lin leave?" Then Maggie found the camera. Dorothy asked, "What is it? And if they were monsters?" But Corbin denied it. Joe noticed what Maggie was taking from Corbin's box. "Maggie, "What are you doing?" she asked. Maggie apologized, and the doctor approached, asking, "What is it?" She noticed it was a camera, and on top of that, it had the address of the National Intelligence Bureau. Corkin pointed his gun at her. "Raise your hands," he ordered. Dorothy asked, "What are you doing?" Corbin continued, saying, "You're the head of the Antibioticism Combat Force." Joe said, "I've been the bad guy." But Corbin shouted, "Don't toy with hope." The doctor drew a gun from her jacket. Then Corbin fired at her. The bullet from the gun was hot, but it fell to the ground in front of Jay. Dorothy and Maggie were frightened, lying on the floor, but Jay kept walking, with only her hair touching the ground. Corbin said, "You should restrain yourself. I won't miss next time. Keep your hands where I can see them. Turn around." Jiao complained, "Field agents are always so heavy-handed, especially now with my short hair." She asked, "Is the main target me then? Am I your test subject? Are you pretending to be his friend while monitoring him? Though he probably doesn't have those memories." Corbin questioned, "What are you talking about?" But the radio reported that Alpha was not responding and Bravo and Delta were injured. Corbin stated he had located survivors and asked if the wounded could be transferred, as there was a doctor right there. Bravo asked how they were, but essentially they had not lost their lives without complications. However, their wounds had already been stitched, so he shouldn't worry. It wasn't anything serious. She asked if he could use the private channel now, and he asked what it was. Joe told him to say thanks and asked what that meant. Corbin asked what she meant, saying he was a traitorous agent. Maybe this freezing was related to them, the traitorous agents. He asked what she thought it meant. Joe simply said that they were the ones who had betrayed them. Shouting about Project Europa, Corbin was startled by the mention of the project, but the doctor explained she was referring to Jupiter's second moon. And in the past, scientists thought it was the most likely place in the solar system to harbor life outside Earth, but it was a frozen planet, asking if he recognized it. Because just like New York now, she asked why he thought the superiors used that name for the project. It had nothing to do with NASA, but rather with the Society of Prophets. Corbin swung his arm at the girl, pointing the gun at her. "That's enough," he said. Joe asked, "Is the field agent in a hurry?" But Corbin replied, "If she didn't have studies on Subject Zero, she'd already be dead." Saying something inaudible to Zoo, Pops looked to the corner without showing any reaction. Then Corbin slapped her. He informed HQ that he would make the Alpha return, and that they should prepare to receive survivors. Joe asked, "What are you afraid of?" It was already dawn outside the building. Lin was restrained, and the soldier referred to him as a package parcel, like he was questioning what would happen if he woke up. Corbin told it not to worry. Even if he wakes up, it won't matter. He won't be able to use his powers for a while. A sufficient amount of insulin had been injected into him. Thanks to the research of the traitorous doctor, Corbin informed Lai that he would carry him. The young man agreed, apologizing to his unconscious and gagged friend. Lai asked his boss, "What do we do now?" Pops only wanted to know why Lai had joined the National Intelligence Bureau. The corporal wondered why Pops was asking that, but he soon realized it was because he might be involved in something terrible. White asked how the injuries were because he had good news. The main communication had been restored, he says, and we just made contact with the nearest shelter to a hospital, though it's a bit far. Lee thanks him. "That's great," he says, but White interrupts, "There's something else before we leave." He asks, "Did you see a monster in the apartment that resembled empty husks?" Lee denies having seen anything like that. White then asks the lieutenant, who also denies it. Apart from the civilians, the lieutenant says there were no other notable encounters. White nods. "That's very good," he says, "thanks to you and your rescue team. It's been a pleasure working with you all." They leave. Cross asks why Ginyu didn't act immediately. Ginny responds, "After cutting the power, I noticed rats among the flock of sheep. Then among the rats, there was a wolf. I waited for the fight to end before acting." Cross replies, "In that case, Arena and I took care of everything." Ginny puts on her glasses. "It was in the name of the Holy Father," she says. The truck drives away. Maddie calls for her mother from inside the car alongside Jay Corbin, Dorothy, and the unconscious Lynn. "What's wrong?" she asks, looking at her big brother. "And why was he tied up?" asked Jay, turning to the medical sister and Uncle Joe. She then questioned the old man, who asked when she had changed her hairstyle. Maggie wanted to know why they had been crumpled, if they were bad people. She pointed her finger at Corbin next. He was surprised. Maggie asked, "What happened to your guitar-playing brother?" Dorothy tried to explain he's still Kurt, but the little girl denied it, saying, "No, he isn't." Joe laughed at the situation. Annoyed, Kurt asked, "What's so funny?" The doctor replied, "Sometimes only a child's perspective can reveal the truth about this country." Kurt nodded, agreeing the nickname Guitar Brother fits, while Corbin took it as an insult. Rhodes noticed smoke rising and called his father. "You started smoking again," he noted. Lee tried to reassure his senior, "Don't worry, the surgeon is just anxious." Rhodes asked about his injury, and Lee explained, I'm fine. Compared to the surgeon's wounds, I've got nothing. A soldier can't hold a gun, just as this country can't save anyone. R.A. said he would register the identities of the survivors. He then questioned whether it was necessary, but Jo was surprised to see her friend. Rhodes asked if she is Jo Shuya, but Ju replies that it had been a long time since she saw Joanna and as she had really gained weight. The girl throws a tablet at Corbin. Jiao asked if she was demoted to the field department and still in the logistics team, or should she say, the rescue team. But Rhodes points a gun at her, and Jiao asks why everyone was doing this today. The girl questions who was responsible for her current situation because she thought they were friends but shouldn't have trusted Ju back then. Jiao asked if she didn't find the truth she was looking for, as they both knew the risks. She looks inside through a window, telling Rhodes to calm down for a minute since they had a motorcycle pursuing them. A camera captures its movement. Jinyu accelerates the motorcycle while using her ability. Rhodes asked what that person was. Something wasn't right, wanting to know if she didn't feel cold at this temperature. Xiao warns that she's an Esper. They absorb ambient energy and maintain low temperatures for long periods. While Rhodes asked if they still move at absolute zero, the doctor agrees and says they have adapted to freezing. Jinyu pulls a revolver from her chest, calibrating it while drawing and pulling out another one. She aims at the truck, energizing it, causing a massive explosion in the area, forcing the truck to fall. Everything inside the location shook rapidly. Jinyu threw the weapon away, saying she missed the target. Lai wondered what had happened and if it was a grenade, but Pops ordered him to drive faster because she was getting closer and closer. Jinyu pointed her pistol at them again, while White opened the back doors of the truck and started shooting at the motorcycle. Jinyu reloaded her weapon with energy, frightening the soldier with the damage it would cause. It was launched toward him rapidly, causing an explosion that overturned the truck, crashing it into a building. From within the smoke of the explosion, Jinyu emerged, still riding the motorcycle, stopping it using her leg. She drew her revolver again, saying that this time she overdid it a bit since the truck had fallen off the bridge. The truck, which was vertical, returned to the correct direction. Then the woman's revolver started to fragment, disintegrating in her hand. Jinyu questioned how the durability reached its limit so quickly, and Arena asked how things were on her side that she had already finished along with the priest. Jinyu explained that she needed to check on the package's situation, while Arena questioned if it should be easy for her. The woman explained that nothing was going as planned. She was talking about the package, but her partner said she was just being lazy. Lai Mo was still gagged. Rose said that if she had to do this again, she would collapse. She asked if everyone was okay, but Joe explained that dealing with Manhattan through Rich wasn't easy. White asked about Subject Zero. Corbin said he was fine. RHX asked if the agent was only worried about him, considering he wasn't the only one in the car. Joe approached Joe and asked if he was okay. Joe replied that he was, but he wanted to know about Miss Perez and Maggie. Dorothy and Maggie were still okay. White asked if there was something Hodis wasn't understanding, since her only mission was to take Subject Zero back to the bunker. As for the rest, that was what her team was supposed to handle. Rose asked what he meant by her team. Running toward the driver's cabin, RHS called for the rookie and her old man. Lai said he was fine, just had some scratches on his face. Rose shouted for Pops, noticing that a stake had pierced his vest. The agent told her not to rush, as he had seen worse situations in Iraq. While Rhodes moved in to help, Bravo explained that he wasn't going to die, but he wanted to know what that was because, in his vision, there were several people, including a car's headlights. Pops said that was what he meant. By worse situations, referring to the hundreds of white armored figures, White admitted they were in trouble now. It was the first time he had seen so many empty shells, but since they were focused, he could try to take them down. Then he asked, is Corbin's speaker powerful enough? Corbin responded, is it loud now? It's not a matter of power. My guitar's broken. White shouted, we'll have to use the primitive method, shooting at the creature. Corbin asked, is there another weapon in the car? Rhodes told him, check for yourself. Approaching Jiao, who asked, need something? Ari just cut off the doctor's handcuffs, surprising her for helping a traitor. Corbin asked, what are you doing? While handing Jiao a first aid kit, he said, don't get the wrong idea. I haven't forgiven the liar. But the current situation requires her to do what she does best, helping her father with a serious wound in the lower abdomen. Jiao said, it's a bit difficult alone. I need someone to assist. Dorothy volunteered, I work in the medical field. I can help. I need someone to take care of Maggie. Maggie said she could take care of herself and didn't need anyone to look after her. Corbin tried to offer his help, but Maggie refused. He said he would keep searching for weapons. Joe asked to be untied because he would take care of Maggie. Rhodes asked, are you the headline uncle? Joe denied it, saying, I'm a security guard. In this situation, he continued, it's not the time to follow rules. We survived so far by helping each other in that lousy apartment. A pale creature tried to attack Lai through the car window. The agent drew a knife from his vest, piercing the monster's hand and neck. Rhodes pointed a shotgun barrel and told him, "Cover your ears." He quickly fired at the creature, destroying its head. Pop said, "I didn't expect to see a doctor twice in the same day." Joe told Dorothy, "Apply pressure to stop the bleeding." Dorothy couldn't stop, and Jay noticed that an artery had been hit. The situation was very bad. Jinyu suddenly appeared behind White. He turned around, saying, "I forgot we had pursuers behind us." Then the woman pulled a katana from her chest. White realized she was also an Esper, wondering who she was. While Jinyu advanced with the sword, Ward aimed his gun. Dorothy applied pressure to remove the stake, but it wasn't enough. Joe noticed that if she continued pressing like that, she might hurt herself. Suddenly, she was surprised as a memory surfaced, a scene from her childhood when she had felt helpless, realizing she had the key to breaking the situation. Then, remembering Linmo, Jinyu advanced with her sword toward White. She forced the soldier to activate his intuition with both eyes, narrowly avoiding her attack, but his gun had been shattered because of it. Jinyu said, "Your blessing is interesting." He asked, "Why would a saint help a sinner?" White questioned the idea of sin. "That term might work for a country bumpkin," he said, "but I'm an atheist. I suspect you're from the Society of Prophets." He noticed that her goal was Subject Zero. Jinyu asked, "Would you do this in a way I could understand? Don't you want to go back?" White frowned. "What are you talking about?" he asked. The woman explained, "You're also an Esper. You should know. You were originally an NSLB agent. You don't belong to that world. There are still things that matter to you." White remembered those things. He wondered, what did I really care about? His thoughts drifted to the image of a police officer who had once asked if she could work with her senior again. White lowered his pistol, saying she was right. But some people had lost their lives in the past, and now there were some still alive. So it didn't matter which side he belonged to, because he just wanted to say the side where the things he cared about were. He wouldn't let Subject Zero fall into her hands. Linmo was still unconscious when a bullet fell on him. Joe and Corbin fired at a creature, while the guard told Maggie to cover her ears. Kurt asked how the rescue team was doing when he saw Joe, but the doctor suddenly looked down, removing Linmo's protective vest. Kurt grabbed her hand, asking what she was doing. She told him to look at the situation now, because there were several monsters outside waiting for a snack and Esper relentlessly chasing them. This wasn't a situation they could handle. The bullets simply entered Jinu's chest. The woman advanced with her sword, and White complained that the bullets should have hit. While Jinyu suddenly seemed surprised, saying that this was the place she broke the ceiling with her katana, falling right on top of Linmo. She looked forward, excited, seeing the people who were taking care of him. Joe asked, "Why is Corbin still hesitating?" When a white skin suddenly grabbed Jinu's leg, Corbin said he would use magic to defeat magic. So Jingu stabbed the white skin with her sword. Corbin injected insulin into Linmo's neck. Jinyu was close when the white skin's blood dripped onto her body, but Lin suddenly woke up, wriggling inside his straitjacket. The woman said she was there to retrieve the lost saint, while Linmo just stared at her, still gagged. Jinyu told him to wait and suddenly recognized him being thrown away by the force of an explosion. Linmo fell to the ground on his knees, wondering what was wrong with him, and why he was weakened again and masked. Zhao removed the mask from his face, saying she had given him a glucose injection, and asked how he was feeling now. Linmo asked if she had changed her hairstyle and said it was good to see her, but Ju told him not to change the subject. Then she smacked his head, asking if his brain had fallen asleep foolishly. Lin stood up, his stomach growling, and said the energy didn't feel enough. Joe complained that she wouldn't give him more because their lives depended on Linmo at that moment. The white skins kept screaming, but their heads were blown apart by bullets. Joe complained that there were too many, and they were difficult to defeat. Joe asked, "Do you have anything to eat?" Preferably something high in sugar, but Joe quickly added, "I'm at the age of diabetes." The woman reflected most of the glucose had been left in the apartment. He can't fight like this, she thought, as Lin complained about feeling dizzy. Suddenly, Maggie pointed at a chocolate bar. "It's the bar my father left for me," she said. "But I'm not hungry now." Lin paused. "I don't know about your father," she said, but he denied it, replying, "It's what your father left for Maggie." Maggie urged him, "Take it. Good children should help others." While Dorothy tried to make do as she treated Pop's wound, Rhodes questioned, "Can you handle it?" That Lin said, "Quickly, eat the bar Maggie's given you." Joe agreed. The young man noticed the mark and said, "Bad memories are coming back." He ate anyway, saying, "It's not the time for that. There are more important things." Joe stood face to face with a pale creature, but he realized he was out of ammo, cursing his situation. Lin rushed toward his friend, surprising Joe when he looked back. Then Lin clapped his hands, disintegrating the pale creature. It was completely destroyed with ease. Joe watched, astonished. He had obliterated it with just one clap. Lin wondered if it was a sound barrier effect. He smiled and said he was starting to enjoy this feeling. The monsters were frightened by the display of power. Then Lin stepped on the guts of one of them. Noticing that there were many pale creatures trembling in fear, he felt something different about them. He wondered why they were running from him. "White," he said, "what's going on here?" White was astonished. "Why are the pale creatures fleeing?" he asked, looking around. The tablet stated that Agent White was past his deadline and needed to reveal his status, but White explained he had some problems. Jinyu then commented, "Even soulless empty shells can feel fear. Since they were originally human, it makes sense they would fear the most powerful holy child." Lin questioned, "Who are you?" Hanjin Yu introduced herself, her tone calm. "I'm Hanjin Yu. I ask that you join us to fulfill the mission entrusted by the sacred girl through the Lord." Lin refused. "I have more important things to do." While thinking this was the anti-government cult the doctor had mentioned, Shinny reflected that the pastor had ordered her to prioritize bringing him back. She then moved her hands to her chest. "In that case," she said, "I must." She reached into space, drawing another fragmented katana from her power. Lin wondered if her ability was to pull weapons from her body, and what the cracks were, since they seemed like layers of emptiness. Jinnu excused herself to Lin Mo, charging at him with both katanas in hand. She aimed to cut the man down with the black sword, launching an upward attack with both weapons. Lin questioned what was happening, wondering if she could have more than one ability, but he noticed something strange about the shards and denied that possibility. Because the shards were crumbling, he grabbed one with his hand, preparing to throw it while thinking he should give it a try. The projectile blast caused an explosion in the area. Lin was suddenly surprised, wondering how her body absorbed the attack and if the crack led to some kind of space. Jinu explained that it was her first time seeing a hole in her stomach. She asked if his attack was just a test. Then, according to the pastor's description, the young man's capabilities should be much more than that. Lin asked if she was provoking him, while realizing she was right. Joe noticed that Lin's situation wasn't very promising. Although he could move normally, he had only recovered 13%. In other words, the parasite inside him was still dormant. Lin reflected on facing an opponent who was also an Esper. Besides, the power difference was a battle of abilities and capability was the trump card. Then he said the lady shouldn't provoke him like that, while thinking that since he couldn't use the black fragment, it was like losing an ace. One could never predict tricks. Since he had already made one mistake, he needed to be more cautious now. At that moment, his situation felt as if he were about to be strangled in the forest at any second. Jinyu lunged with another kick attack, which Lin avoided. Both of them charged at each other. The woman wondered if he also dodged the aerial attack and realized it was no longer a matter of speed. Lin reflected that she didn't just feel like a snake. Her attacks were exactly like one. He could only try to overpower her by throwing a punch. The strike caused an explosion in the battle area. Jinyu was unscathed after being hit. Lin was astonished by the result because his arm had entered her chest. Jinyu commented, "It's the first time someone has entered my body like that." Lin realized her power was spatial. The woman lifted her heel from the ground, moving closer to Lin. She wondered how far he could enter, and Lin felt he couldn't use the sound barrier at this range. She had been curious about this before and felt that Lin's gaze was familiar to her. Lin was startled by this as she embraced him. "He is the speaker," she said, expelling him forcefully. Lin's arm shattered from the attack, but the pastor warned Jinyu to stop immediately. "We've received the NSLB at the base," he said, "and we're holding the head of 13 with great force." This was her chance beyond the orders of the speaker. However, the speaker had also received a revelation and they would find Lin again. Jinyu complained, "Good times are always short," adding that they would have to stop there. She stuck out her tongue and said, "Next time, I'll make sure he learns the words of the prophet." Then she clashed her two swords together, causing a massive explosion in the area. Lin tried to observe through the smoke, but they noticed that she had escaped. Something about it seemed strange. Joe approached, asking, "Are you okay? What's the current situation?" The young man responded, "I'm fine, and we're safe for now." A helicopter descended from the sky. Lin questioned, "What will we do now?" Joe realized it was a helicopter descending towards White, who commented, "They finally arrived." The helicopter lands, stopping its rotors on the ground. The soldiers step out and order Alpha 1 and 2 to rescue the civilians while the others should follow the plan. They place Pops on a stretcher. Rhodes asks, "Who were they?" One of the soldiers introduces himself, saying they were colleagues and thanking them for their hard work. Rhodes looks back surprised. White salutes and says, "I didn't expect my boss to come personally." Frank simply states that his soldier did well and thanks him. Then the light from their weapons shines on Jay and Lin's faces. The doctor asks, why was the security department on a bunker mission? And why bring high-ranking officials? Lin is just confused. The soldiers explain that Subject Zero is under control for Frank, who is the head of the strategy and decision department. Berbara, the leader of the biosafety department, comments that this was unexpected. Joe calls out to her friend Barbara. Barbara responds, "I'll see you in hell." Now the situation seemed clear. So comments that her and the bald idiot from the Department of Fools showing up there wasn't a good sign. Barbara asks, "Is my image really that bad?" Either way, Frank intervenes to explain, stating the reason why he and Barbara were there. Since Subject Zero, Esper Lin Mo, was necessary to uncover the truth about the freezing incident. The young man asks, "What does that have to do with me?" But Ju stops him, telling him not to believe Frank's nonsense. All Frank wanted was to continue Project Europa. Lin questions that name, saying she had never heard of it before. She wants to know what the bald man is hiding. Frank simply asks, "How did you know about Project Europa?" Startled, the doctor reveals that she was right. Lin questions if she was just trying to get information out of him, to which the doctor confirms. Frank responds, "Since you left intelligence, we couldn't execute you due to your contributions to the country." But a gun was aimed at her from a distance, firing at the woman while using a silencer. However, Glenn intercepts the shot, protecting his friend. Frank wonders, what is happening? Lin tells the doctor, "Wear a helmet next time you try to extract information from someone." The woman responds, "At least I still have you." The young man asks, were they trying to silence her for touching on a door spot? Because this was exactly like the movies. Berger grabs Frank and asks, was the freezing incident and all the other events connected to Project Europa? Why did you say anything? Frank simply responds, "You'll find out, just not right now." So the soldier should take her away. Berber demands, "What's the headquarters chief doing?" She asks, looking around. Joe tells Lin, "Be careful. I'm still not fully recovered. Even my body is at its limit," as veins spread over his arm. Lin reflects to himself that if he could use all of his power, dealing with these soldiers would be easy. Meanwhile, Inc. orders, "Hunt down the woman." At least the others were safe while the civilians were captured and taken to the shelter. Then Lin remembers his promise, never to run away again. He grabs Joe's hand, calling to the doctor, "Hold on tight." She asks, "Are we going to repeat the process from before?" The soldier starts shooting at them, but Lin escapes, leaving only a trail behind. Frank wonders, how was he so fast? Berger frees herself and calls him Baldy. She reminds him, "I already warned you about Lin's speed." But the bald man doesn't even respond. Frank turns and says Joe must have gotten hurt. However, he is struck in the groin by Barbara, who says, "Without Subject Zero, we are doomed." To throw in, Frank questions, "What should we do? Should I chase after them?" But Barbara orders, "Forget it. Return to the bunker. There's too much we still need to learn." Lin soared over the building's Chew, crashing into a window and breaking it. She fell into an apartment, landing next to a lifeless body. He coughed and asked, "Are you okay, doctor?" She replied, "I'm fine, but your condition is really bad. You're bleeding from your eyes." Joe looked through the supplies and assured him, "It's not that bad." While Lin wondered what she was doing, she tossed a milk carton. The young man questioned, "What is that?" Noticing it was freezing from the inside, he asked, "Where are you getting this from?" Ju replied, "We won the lottery." The man seemed to have been lifeless for a long time, and the cause was a gunshot wound to the chest. As for the killer, it seemed like both had fought each other. The survivors had probably fought over resources. But Lin realized they should be grateful to them, because that's how they won the lottery. A blessing in disguise. Distress, Lin commended, "Other people's sadness is our luck." Just like before, she asked if something was wrong with him. But the young man simply said he remembered the past. She repeated that it was all in the past. Then she smacked his stomach, telling him to focus because he should be eating now. While Lin asked what she was doing, Joe put onions, potatoes, and packaged milk into a hot pot. She commented that it wasn't strange since they were in a Chinese restaurant. It was normal to have ingredients, but if he was complaining, he should look at the two on the floor. Lin said he had no objections to the ingredients, but it was weird to throw everything together in a big pot like that. One asked if the food didn't need to be cooked and the milk thawed since it saved fuel. But Lin said she misunderstood the meaning of efficiency, wondering if it was possible that the doctor wasn't good at cooking. Joe said she was a doctor, not a chef, so she didn't need to know how to cook. Then, throwing a potato at Lin's mouth, she added that it was the end of the world, yet he was still picky. A woman watched them from a distance while Joe commented that, given Lin's physical condition, this was the most efficient way to replenish calories. The girl repeated to herself not to be afraid. Joe told Lin to eat quickly because they weren't on a date, and it was cold, while the man spat out the food, saying it was burning hot. She commented that Lin's body was adapting to the frozen environment, but she couldn't, and the protective suit wouldn't last much longer. She needed a place to recharge its energy. Joe noticed something behind Lin. Then she drew the pistol from her jacket, asking, "Who's there?" She told the test subject not to move. The girl trembled in fear of the gun, tripping over the corpse in the room. She dropped her bed into the air. The baton struck her on the head. Joe approached and asked, "Who are you and why are you spying?" The girl said she meant no harm and wasn't a monster. She was a survivor like them. Her name was Penny and she was there to gather supplies. Penny explained she had just seen a fire and came to check the situation. If they had nowhere to go, the fortress where she was staying was nearby and could shelter them. CO said it sounded like a trap, but Lynn recognized the girl. Penny tried to insist that it was true. However, she then noticed that it was Mr. Lin, who often bought cigarettes and lived in the Fang apartment. She couldn't be mistaken because of his earring. Liv repeated the part about the cigarettes and realized she was really Penny from the convenience store. Thinking she was someone he knew, the girl grabbed his hand, grateful that he was alive. She said she had heard that monsters attacked the apartment. Lynn thought of her as a social butterfly. Penny led them to a subway station. Lynn asked if this was the fortress she had mentioned. It seemed like a good hiding place. Recent survivors had avoided monster attacks by going underground. Zhao commented that the transmission had harmed those who hid. However, it was clear they had made modifications. They needed to be prepared. It was the station chief's idea. Lynn asked about that role. Joe thought of his graffiti on the wall. The young man responded that it was Brooklyn, so it was normal. But she was talking about the new graffiti, wondering if that was an eye. Penny urged them to enter quickly. Ju said she had seen that before. The young man apologized for bothering Penny. Then, as they walked in, the wall revealed something written. "The Son of God will save them." Penny asked if they wanted an introduction, saying this was New York's Gutway line. Lynn commented that the place was a little strange. A woman praying asked if Penny had returned and brought new people. Penny replied, "It's enough for the month," but her friend warns her of the danger, even if it was to help the divine child. While the redhead only wanted to know about the station chief, a woman in boots approached. Penny greeted the station chief, who wore a beret over one eye and walked with armed masked guards. The chief asked, "Did you leave the hideout again?" Penny responded, "This time, I just wanted to finish the quota quickly since my brother was sick, and I wanted to do my part." She continued, "But putting that aside, I found new survivors. They were my former neighbors, and I know the situation in the apartments." Lynn wondered, were you the loud dam of that place? But Jake told him, "Don't jump to conclusions." The station chief approached, saying, "I had noticed that, but we should follow the usual rules." The soldiers surrounded Lynn, and he asked, "What are you doing?" The chief replied, "Don't get nervous. It's just a quick inspection." Lynn questioned, "What exactly are you going to inspect?" The woman shined a flashlight in his eye. She was impressed that his pupil was circular. "Impossible," she muttered. "You're kneeling and welcoming the sacred child." Lynn asked, "What's going on?" CO responded, "They must be members of the Society of the Prophet," and Lynn comments that she got it right. But Xiao doesn't find them hostile and thinks they might not be the same group. The chief says they had been waiting for him and that the saint possessed a holy ring since the apocalypse began. They had been hiding there with no one to save them, believing they had been forgotten. But the empty husks kept appearing. At first, she thought the gods didn't exist in the world, until the day she saw the robed ones. That was the first time she witnessed a miracle and saw the saints with her own eyes. Since that attack, they converted to the prophets, sheltering those wounded by the apocalypse. While the saints returned to their mission, the survivors were worried. But before leaving, the most venerable of the saints prophesied that a saint possessing the eye of the sacred ring would come there. They had been waiting for the prophecy, wondering if it would really happen, never expecting to actually witness it today. Since the survivors needed the saint, his appearance had given everyone hope. Lynn asked about hope, since it was the most important thing in this apocalypse. Then Penny brings food for the saint. He looks at the plate, impressed. Even the food had eyes drawn on it. The chief says that offering the sacred communion was a duty, and as a saint, he should prioritize his combat power, as he was the only one protecting them in the apocalypse. Zhao says they risked their lives for the sacred communion, and on the surface, saved people for the Society of the Prophet. Liv responds, "This was hypocrisy. One of the priests says we are running out of food. We should distribute the sacred communion now." But she whispers, "It isn't the time to talk about this. We will resolve it later. We need to keep the saint to protect us." Lynn thinks that the leader, Penny, and the survivors had been deceived by the prophets. His appearance only strengthened the false belief. He had been used without realizing it, and that was frustrating. He had something to do, so he calls the doctor. Zhao waves at him and tells him to wait. Even if you expose the lies now, they wouldn't believe you. Lynn says, "I know, but I have faith in the cunning. I wouldn't do something so stupid, so the doctor should trust me. I have a plan." Zhao asks, "What plan?" Lynn approaches, calling out to the leader, who introduces herself as Hannah. "What can I do for you?" she asks. The young man says, "I am the hope of your faith." She agreed. Then he asked if there was anything he could do to help them. Smoke drifted gently through the train's lights. So explained that his plan was to help them build a cultivation chamber in the subway, secure basic food supplies, prepare the power and heating so they wouldn't freeze in the dark, and expand the platform area. So now Lin should be called the virtuous saint, she said, a kind and generous one. Lin asked, since when did kind become an insult? She replied that he was too trusting, especially after being saved, and that it was knave to help the society. The young man said the doctor was wrong, which caught her off guard. Lin continued, we were the ones who trusted you. It wasn't kindness that made me help you. With her understanding of the body, she knew that using abilities consumed a great deal of energy. That was why they had created the sacred communion. He asked, do you remember when we first met? If it hadn't been for you, I would have collapsed from exhaustion. Back then, your hair was long and soft, he added. But she interrupted, giving him a light tap on the head and saying, don't change the subject. Lin said he wanted to do the same as the Prophet Society, because they could work together for the good of others. And that was the difference. He wasn't relying on deception and exploitation, but rather on the kindness she wished for. Joe became furious with her friend. Lin said he would stop joking, and she told him to get straight to the point. The young man said he was very gullible, but in reality, it was the opposite. Even after the disaster, he still trusted everyone and never expected everything to become some kind of cycle. If he had trusted Mingming and told her the seeds had sprouted, maybe she wouldn't have chosen Lu Dong. Ju reflected that it wasn't strange to like agriculture. He continued, saying that after deceiving himself and thinking carefully, the things he had discovered stemmed from humanity's weakness in the apocalypse. Because of it, people became sensitive, trapped in chaos, some turning selfish. I don't want to be like that, he added. Zhao commented that precisely because humanity was weak, they should unite. His age, she said, was the time to bring everything together, as productivity was the key to the apocalypse. She grabbed his collar, saying, people have the power of unity. She moved closer to his face and added, I will be right in front of you. Lin questioned, what are you about to do? The woman said she wouldn't do anything, but had changed her opinion about him. While Lin commented that she was very close, Penny suddenly interrupted, calling for the saint, but she fell to the ground due to her clumsiness. The girl tried to get up and announced that she had found something incredible under the subway. After the power was restored, they discovered a maintenance passage there. At first, they thought it was just a maintenance passage, but further ahead, it didn't seem like something one would find in a subway station or a maintenance tunnel. Lin asked, is it a door? What could it be? The doctor replied, confirming Lin was right. Penny started rambling about doors, and Lin told the doctor that the NSLB had installed themselves there. The woman responded, it's noisy. Lin went up to Penny and turned her around, telling her, inform everyone not to come for now. I'll investigate the door. Joe picked up an agency card while Lin told Penny, wait for news. The door authenticated the identity, and the doctor complained about how slow old things were. Lin questioned, hasn't it been abandoned? She replied, I'm technically retired, but this isn't my card. It was Rhodes. The young man asked, how did you get that without a car? He was starting to understand the attitude of her former colleagues. But she mentioned that she had to shear a sheep. When the door opened, Lin invited the woman to enter first. She remarked that he was very polite. Joe analyzed that the energy system was old and manually operated, but at least it was powered independently. Lin asked if she knew what the facility was, but the woman didn't either and suggested they take a look to find out. The young man looked between the grates, ran his finger across them, and noticed dust, concluding the place had been unused for a long time. There was no absolute silence or frost, but since they were underground, he wondered if there was a continuous heating system in place. Lin told the doctor that this place felt strange. She agreed, noting that while everything looked old, the arrangement seemed fairly recent. The young man questioned what the purpose of this place was, but the doctor was surprised to see a control room filled with NSLB monitors. The young man guessed that it might belong to the NA base. Jiao explained that they had hidden the base within a civilian installation. Lin wanted to know if the national budget had been entirely spent here. Meanwhile, a woman began working on the computer. The system requested a protocol code, and she tried to recall one, noticing something unusual. Suddenly, then she entered the Project Europa code. The system stated that authentication was successful. It began preparing to update, surprising the doctor. Lin suddenly stood up from the chair. As the update reached 11.3%, it jumped to almost 80%, finally finishing. The online icebreaker project system announced that they could now break the code. Joe asked, what is this for? The system warned voice inquiries are being monitored. The answer came. The icebreaker project is part of Project Europa, designed to monitor freezing events and assist agents by providing optimal actions. The system was integrated into the giant ice network, but had only activated in the Brooklyn section with some functions offline. Jill repeated, we could overcome the cold and deduced. This is about the NAA. Lin completed her thought, saying they knew about the global freeze in advance. The doctor slammed her hand on the panel, shouting, the NSLB is hiding something so huge. Nothing really changed. We have no idea how many lives were lost due to their confidentiality. Lynn noticed that Joe's reaction was not as rational as usual, and her relationship with the NSLB must be more complicated than it seems. From the freeze to the espers and the empty husks, all the questions were connected. Lin looks ahead cautiously, trying to analyze Zhao Shriya's state of mind. He asks, "What are you thinking?" Zhou denies it, saying, "I was just remembering the past." But Lin reflects that even after all this time together, he still doesn't know much about her. Dr. Zhou Shuya, who was both rational and mysterious, was also fragile. She asks, "Why are you staring at me?" Embarrassed, the young man says, "I was also thinking about the past." However, the system suddenly plays a warning. Lin sighs, grateful for the system, but she immediately instructs the computer to report the situation. The railway transit route was crowded with civilians. Joe questions, what's happening with those people? Even Barbara was there. The system announces estimated arrival at the platform in 30 minutes. Joe then reflects on why Barbara brought so many people there and whether it could be related to the accidental activation of the icebreaker. It would be better to ask in person. Lin asks, "Where are you going?" She replies, "I'm heading to the tunnel to meet my old friend." The young man says, "I will go with you in case we encounter empty husks." The tunnel temperature was extremely low. It was recommended to wear protective suits for hazardous environments, with 2 usable sets available in Zone B. Lane comments, "The system is really smart." Joe questions, was the budget spent on this? But she was the one who needed to change, since the battery in her suit was close to running out. Lynn asks, "Why do you have one too?" Then Joe gets hit in the forehead by a briefcase. Joe says it's less ridiculous this way. Lynn responds, "You've already adapted to the freezing environment, so it's not necessary." The girl explains, "You need to maintain a normal body temperature to function properly. If the heat runs out, you'll just be a living popsicle." She opens her suit while continuing, the protective suits are lightweight and highly expandable. They provide safety in extreme environments. For you, they can reduce heat consumption when you're not using abilities because they monitor your body in real time. They also prevent you from overusing your abilities. Lynn was only thinking about the doctor without clothes, wondering what had happened in the past for her to have those scars. Joe notices his gaze, then turns to him. "Did you hear what she just said? Lynn is just thinking that she has large breasts." The doctor, questioning if he's daydreaming, looks down and realizes. Then she turns to Lynn. "I understand." Since his ability hadn't affected his normal desires, she would take note of his preferences. So he is sent flying, excited. The doctor tells him, "Don't move, this will only take a moment." She presses something onto his chest, applying strips. Lane questions, "What was that?" The doctor explains, "Prepare patches. They can cover the Nell logo, as some people might be sensitive to it. We should avoid any problems." He comments, "It feels like a second skin. I can already feel the heat loss decreasing." While Jiao holds a pistol in her hand, Ling is ready for combat. They both set off, and he asks, "How did your hair get shorter?" Jade dodges the question. A camera records the two of them as the loudspeaker blares an emergency announcement. Brothers and sisters located on the west track temporarily evacuate to the east. The west track will be temporarily closed. Thanking them for their cooperation, Hannah asked that the Holy Spirit bless them this winter. Hannah then asked Lin if he had transmitted the message correctly. The young man thanked her. The woman apologized for her presumption but wanted to know if there was something on the west track. Lin reflected that he couldn't mention the NA personnel as it would cause conflict, so he responded that it was safer to stay away from there due to gas leaks. Hannah accepted the answer from the Holy Sun. The young man reassured her that the closure was only temporary, and after the investigation, things would return to normal. The woman pulled something from her pocket, saying, "Since you're going to investigate, you should take this radio. I've tuned it to the central control channel, and you can contact them at any time." But there was something else. A tape on his arm had come loose. She touched his shoulder, saying, "Everyone trusts you. The holy children who came after the speaker only wanted sacred communion, but you have truly helped them." Lan told her not to worry because he wasn't going to run away. Then the tape was back in place on his arm. She asked the Lord to light the path for the Holy Child and for Julin. He hinted that the power supply to the section had been cut, but the doctor told him to wait because they were approaching the estimated location and should hold on. Lin put the flashlight in his mouth. She asked what he was doing while the young man tried to fix the lighting there. He touched the generator, saying he had learned to fix things in a parallel world. Turning on the train car's lights, Lin said it was expected from the New York subway, but the doctor replied, "It's a new line." However, she told him to be quiet and look over there, surprising Lin with the view. Since there were hundreds of people standing still, waiting for something, Joe commented that most of them seemed to be civilians. "Why are they just standing there like that?" he asked. But then she noticed Barbara among the civilians. She had a lifeless expression. Joe shouted, "What are you doing bringing civilians here?" while Lin told her to wait. "This is very strange," she said. Initially, the people were on the platform, but now they're facing us. There must be something unknown at work. Barbara simply trembled her legs without speaking. Moving toward Joe, she opened her head, revealing herself to be an empty shell. Joe was shocked as the face of his friend turned into that of a zombie. Lynn shouted for the doctor to be careful as soon as she noticed it was an empty shell. But Ju fired toward the creature, completely surprising Lynn by doing so. Jia had emptied the gun's magazine. She tossed the empty magazine aside, drew another, and rearmed her weapon. Jiao said she was a little rusty, while Lynn questioned, "Is that what you call speed rusty?" She wanted to know if her former colleague had turned into an empty shell. Joe denied it, saying, "I haven't transformed into one. Those are empty shell mimics designed to deceive people." The mimics opened their heads, surprising Gio as a light began to shine. The creatures opened their chests, spreading the glow, forcing Jay and Lynn to cover their eyes. As the woman shut her eyes, Jiao remembered her colleagues telling her not to look back. Wondering what this was, Barbara commented, "That would fit perfectly," and Arachi added, "It's the birthday present we bought for Jay." However, the cake was fake, made with 3D printing. Apologies, Arachi continued, "The laziness department didn't approve vacations or funding." Joe simply smiled and thanked her friends. Lynn said no matter how fast he was, he couldn't run faster than light. But when he looked ahead, he was surprised. All the mimics had turned into Joe Shuya, shouting at the test subject. That they were the real one, Lynn said. "This is going to be complicated." The women kept shouting that they were the real one, and Lynn became confused. But Ju pulled the earring from her ear, ripping it off and throwing it toward her friend. Lynn caught the earring in his hand. Noticing that it was the doctor's earring, he thanked her for her help, clenching his fist, but she remained relentless with herself. Lynn rushed toward the hundreds of mimics, shouting that the doctor was crazy but very effective. Then he advanced, lifting his foot off the ground, destroying all the fake Sha in his path. "I'm familiar with the fact that empty shells have blue blood," he muttered. Joe kept talking to Lynn, asking if he had some kind of special fetish, because every time she added, "I end up covered in the empty shell's blood thanks to you." Lynn apologized to the doctor, but she threw something else into his hand. It was the other pair of earrings. Lynn tried to speak to her, but she interrupted. "It's a gift," she said, "because there's no real reason. I wanted to throw them away 3 years ago, but now I can't use them as a pair anyway. Since there are no trash bins, I might as well toss them to you." He thanked her, wondering what kind of reasoning is that. It made him feel like a garbage can. Joe looked to the side, hesitant. Then Lynn noticed the doctor's expression and wondered if there was a story behind the earring. But it wasn't important now. They needed to figure out why the monsters were there. Joe told him, "Stop getting distracted and help me look." Lynn asked, "What am I looking for?" The girl said, "The core in a vesicle. You've seen it before. It's the same one that was absorbed into your body." The young man wondered what kind of discoveries had been made about this. Joe asked, "Do you remember the hive-type empty husks that destroyed the apartment? They had no core." Lynn agreed, saying the progenitor body of 13 had a core. Then he questioned, were the empty husks without a core descendants of a more powerful one? Joe explained the parent continued producing new offspring. Going back to these monsters, they were indeed coreless descendants. If they had a core, we would have found it by now. Lynn asked, "Is that really the case?" She then questioned, "What do you mean?" The young man found them in the tunnel strange. They seemed to obey orders, but only descendants without a parental body could mimic, as if someone had placed them there. However, someone was approaching. The Dew asked what kind of joke this was and what was going on there, demanding to know if she was responsible. While Lynn groaned in annoyance, recognizing her, Jay asked, "Who is she?" Arena replied, "There were finally mimics here, but thanks to the two of you, the plan was completely ruined. It's infuriating." Cross asked Arena what happened, and the woman called him back. She shouted, "Just thinking about it makes me furious. The mimic I was supposed to defeat was snatched away by those two." The person on the communication channel responded, "They both could handle it." Arena denied it, saying one of them is just an ordinary person. Jiao raised her gun, calling the girl foul-mouthed. Arena suddenly took a deep breath. "So that's how it is," she said. "That was Subject Zero. What was Jinghua doing?" The priest replied, "She just had bad luck today." Cross warned Arena, "Don't act rashly." The speaker emphasized avoiding contact. He has his own plan. Arena took off her earpiece, irritated. "That insistence is annoying," she said. "My plan is ruined." She stomped on the earpiece, now completely enraged. Then she prepared her sword, muttering, "Everyone loves to give me orders." But she didn't care about any plan. The two of them needed to get out of her way. Arena charged forward with her sword toward Lynn. Zio fired a few shots at the girl, but they were easily dodged thanks to her agility. The doctor complained about wasting bullets, but the attack was blocked by Linmo with his bare hands. Arena gritted her teeth, calling him black. However, Lin transformed, saying that since she had chosen to fight, there was no reason to avoid combat. He then transformed into his monstrous form. His mask became part of his face. Arena commented that he looked different from their last battle. Now he and hair had become nothing but armor. Even Zio was impressed, questioning if the test subject had evolved again. The young man wondered what was happening because it felt different from the last 2 times. The parasite appeared, fused with his suit in its most complete form yet, but it warned that he was not the only one with this power. However, Lin wanted to know if it had decided to emerge. Arena grew a tail at her waist, saying that it wasn't just her. She repeated that the situation was interesting. Now, with a cat-like grin on her face, she transformed into a panther, telling him to show his true strength. The woman charges, and Lin wonders if all she thinks about is fighting. A psychotic girl remains the same even in the apocalypse. He forms claws in his hands. Arena pulls a pistol from inside her vest, firing at Lin while holding the sword in her mouth. The young man dodges the bullets with his claws, slicing them into pieces without even thinking. "Aren't you scared?" Arena taunts, her eyes narrowing. "Don't dodge if you have any courage." Lin smirks, calling her a wild cat. Thus, their fight becomes a battle of speed and evasion, with Lin provoking her. Arena tries to attack again, but the young man notices an armor-like defense. He lunges with his claws, striking the girl in the chest. He is surprised by the result because once again, his attack is intercepted by a shield. The parasite inside it recalls the shield and says, "This was what blocked my attack before. It's not a normal shield." Lin signals that they are in the middle of a fight, unfazed. Arena grabs the sword from her mouth, slashing vertically at his right leg, then kicks toward Lin. "You're quick," Lin mutters, dodging the kick. Joe watches and then says, "I know what that shield is." Lin looks at him confused. "How do you know?" The doctor explains, "I wasn't just watching idly during the fight. There was an electromagnetic force between the molecules that prevented fusion and deflected bullets instead of blocking them. Therefore, the ability was to manipulate that force. Her extraordinary movements reinforced the theory. Following that logic, she could manipulate the force between herself and the air molecules, as well as the ground." "Lin, wait," she called out as the tips of her fingers spun, starting to turn red. He turned to the doctor. "Is this force a form of energy?" The doctor replied, "It could be converted into one." "Very good," the young man said, a grin crossing his face. "I know how to break through her shield." So noticed his reckless attitude. Mentally, she urged him to wait. "What are you talking about?" She thought, but before she could react, Arena attacked him. Lin defended against the strike using his Reen Claw. Then a realization struck him. It was just as he had expected. His opponent spun 360 degrees to strike again. She stepped back and asked, "What's wrong? Have you decided to stop dodging?" Lin looked behind him, calling out, "Are you ready now?" A scar ran across his eye. "If you can't hold on any longer, it's my turn," he said, advancing toward her with his crimson claws. Arena is surprised by his action, being struck before she even realizes it or can do anything. She says that even though she has her coffin of Sada, her speed doesn't mean anything, especially now that Lin Mo had clones attacking her from behind. Arena reflects that it was an afterimage from high-speed movement and questions how this man is so fast. Noticing that he had turned completely red, even his face had taken on that color, she asks, "How is it possible that my energy is being drained?" Lin Mo was absorbing all of her power, just like a vampire. Jiao analyzes from a distance and says the piezoelectric effect occurs when certain materials are subjected to mechanical stress. This causes a charge separation and potential, leading to the polarization of crystals. In simpler terms, it can generate electricity. The shield amplified the force between cells and converted attacks into mechanical stress, keeping them weak as long as the defense exceeded their intensity. Lin Mo's claw grows larger and sharper because this type of high-speed attack allows the subject to absorb energy. In other words, the shield had turned into a coffin of its own energy. The young man states that in this world, no shield is impenetrable. Then he curses her, asking why she was always ruining his plans. Lin questions the plan, wanting to know what she was working on, if she was controlling the empty husks outside, and if the freezing was related to them. Orita smiles, saying she understands because he knows nothing. However, if he wanted to know the answer, he should see it for himself as she transfers her veins to him. Orita submits her parasite to Lin Mo. Then the young man suddenly opens his eyes, finding himself as a spectral figure. In that moment, Lin wonders if that was Brooklyn before the freezing, but it seemed different from what he remembered. He wants to know what it was when he notices a pistol in his field of vision. Why he is holding someone in his arms while wondering how he became a police officer and who this woman was who had been shot. While there is a girl standing in front of White, she realizes that the person is Arena and her parasite connected, bringing her there. But there was a door beside the girl. Lin steps through the door and someone says they would lead the station servers to Arena, reminding her that they are more useful. Live. Ariam agrees with the speaker. Someone looks at Line Mo, saying that some rats have entered. The young man wonders if these aren't just memories. He wants to know how it is possible, but the hooded figure is himself, calling him Mr. Thief. Lee questions how this could be and how he could talk to him if he was inside memories, since that man was another version of him. The young man asks, who was that monster? But the figure asks, don't you already have the answer? Lin reflects that he is right. He simply cannot understand because that was the true owner of the body he currently inhabits. Ed, in this parallel universe, asks why he is still alive. The other Len asks, did you think that by transmigrating, your soul would simply disappear? He apologizes for the disappointment, but he had not vanished. Then he removes the hood, surprising the original Lan Mo. The speaker says he borrowed the empty husk line left behind and got to know the boy earlier than he had planned. Lei reflects that those were the same scars as Ludong's. He wonders if the apparition and ability to speak with him were part of his power, along with his plan. But the man says he doesn't mind revealing it. Since Lin can't do anything about his plan, he moves behind Lin Mo, gripping him with his claws. He tells him that he will accelerate the freezing process. Driving his claw in, he says he has no other choice and his time is up. But Lin Mo should think of it as a welcome gift. The young man suddenly wakes up, remembering that he had returned. The scene feels familiar, with Arena saying that he understands nothing. But he kicks Arena away. The girl asked him to let her finish speaking. However, he points the pistol at her head, making her ask when he stole that. Ling Mo answers without tricks, questioning what she meant by accelerating the freezing. Arena asks where he heard about that, but the young man says he will tell her one last time. She should answer his question. Arena responds, it's fine, I'll tell you, but you should hold the trigger firmly. Don't hesitate. The speaker chief wanted to accelerate the freezing, but didn't explain why. Ling questions the reason, but Arena only wants her promised time reversal. She has personal grudges knowing that he and those lunatics only share aligned interests. She doesn't care about what happens after the freezing. Joe questions, is that what they call out of sight, out of mind? Arena asks, are you saying that if we don't intervene, the world will end? The doctor mentions the doomsday theory, assuming the world is doomed to destruction. Arena points to the freezing as proof of the planet's end. Zhao says the test subject claimed that everyone lost their lives, then asks Lin Mo, what do you think? Lin responds, isn't it obvious? Even if it's just to live a few more days, we have to stop them. Arena asks, did you hear what I said about stopping them? Then I want to hear the plan. Zhao asks, are we brainwashing refugees to use them as slaves to work for us? The woman asks, what's wrong with that? Is that our problem? Those fools deserve to be our slaves. The weak should be subordinate to the strong. They lose the ability to think with false hope. But it was funny. Lin pulls a radio from his pocket and asks, did you hear all that? Arena is suddenly surprised. The young man tells Hannah, respond if you've heard it. The girl calls out for the Holy Sun. Lin questions, do you record the conversation just now? She confirms, yes. I transmitted it through the station's central control to all platforms of the G-Line subway in New York, so everyone should have heard about it. Lin questions if she had just asked how they were going to stop the prophetic society. But the first step was when civilians discovered that everything was a lie. That way, they would destroy the false hope she had built. The men removed their masks with glaring eyes, stepping on them in rage against the prophetic society. Hannah rips the bracelet from her arm. Then Joe says his test subject was very clever for thinking of that. Lin wonders if she always made him look dumb, but he replies that this was probably the value of having lived twice. Arena starts laughing, and Ju asks why. She responds, it's too late. You've talked too much. Then she suddenly emits a glow. Joe questions, hadn't I absorbed all of her energy? What's lighting up? But Lin doesn't know either. 30 minutes earlier, Hannah asks, does Lin Mo have another request? The young man remains silent, thinking that she must have noticed but didn't expose him. He says he has something to ask her, and the woman should answer sincerely. She agrees. The young man asks, do you believe in the Society of Prophets? Hannah responds, yes, and not just me. All brothers and sisters believe. But Lin rejects her answer, telling her to answer sincerely because she understands what he is really asking. Hannah is surprised upon realizing the true meaning of the question. She accepts that she should be honest, responding that she doesn't trust them, but believes in Lin Mo. However, many were devoted Christians, and she could only maintain order and avoid collapse. It was strange for a stripper to want to help others while wearing a revealing outfit and playing the role of the Last Order, but Station Chief was a bad title. Liv responds that Hannah is incredible, and it isn't ridiculous because anyone would want to help others within their abilities. And without her, the Station Chief, he couldn't even imagine what the station would be like. She had just said that she also wanted to free the group from the Society of Prophets. Now what they needed to do was let them know the true purpose and not worry. He would figure something out, but she needed to cooperate. Besides, she should stop calling him Holy Son because he has a name, and it's Linmo. Lin says that just like last time, she was trying to escape while Joe opens fire. Both shoot at maximum speed at Arena, trying to send her beyond, piercing the warning with several bullets. However, Lin orders them to cease fire when a light appears. They are surprised by the magnitude of the light. It explodes shortly after, with Lin holding on to Ju. Both fall side by side. Lin is still shocked by the explosion. Ju warns that it was close. Getting up, the girl asks, "What is happening?" The man responds, "You should remember what I said after the last fight. That was the teleportation I mentioned." Outside, in the isolated city, Cross walks through the snow, carrying Arena's wounded body. Arena says nothing. Cross remarks that even though Grace can repair her body, she is still in bad shape. The girl apologizes, and the priest is surprised that she can even apologize for her actions. However, Arena raises her middle finger at Cross, telling him not to get carried away. Then she apologizes, saying, "I lost to the black-haired guy. Don't inform Han Jinu. She'd only get more annoying." Cross just tells her to rest. Lin is startled as he looks ahead, wondering why he feels this way. The atmosphere is completely wrong compared to what he expected. The people in the subway look downcast. Lin tries to talk to them, but wonders why they are like this. And if all of them are afraid of him, Zhao asks if he has guessed the reason, and the young man agrees. Lin says that naturally, this was bound to happen. In a collapse of faith, people become paranoid. Paranoia breeds restlessness and suspicion, especially in this apocalypse. Then he says that he has experienced this firsthand. He tells the people, "You must already know that the empty shells deliberately attacked the fortress, put the saints on display, and enslaved them." One of the people asks, "What's the point in listening to Lin, since both he and the others are holy sons?" A girl pleads with him, "Don't say that." Liv responds, "I understand why you don't trust me, but I am just feeling a little restless. This is a problem. However, I am not like them, because I am not trying to enslave you." A man shouts, "Prove it, Lin Mo." A woman tries to stop him, while Ju asks, "What should we do? The people aren't welcoming us. Should we fight?" But Lin refuses. Resorting to violence, while it may provide an immediate solution, would still leave people unsettled. It could even escalate things, causing trust and prestige to vanish. Jiao asks, "What do you intend to do in this case? This will devastate the people." Lin says it will crumble from within, just like it did to me in the past. Suddenly, Hannah fires into the air, shouting, "Silence!"